All right, we are live. Welcome back to Reason Answers.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Today we have part two, so to speak. Stands on its own, but it's a continuation of the theme of last week, where we looked at every Muslim, or at least online Muslim Dawaganda's favorite topic, that of child marriage. Today, we're going to be talking about a common line of Muslims. Go ahead and raise your hand if you've heard a Muslim say, in response to their prophet, actually marrying a 6-year-old and actually having sex with her when she turned 9. In response to that, say, the Virgin Mary, who never had sex, according to both Islam and Christianity, was 12 when she was impregnated. Therefore, this is just normal behavior. So that's the particular line that we're going to be looking at today. Welcome, Mary. Anything you want to say?
Nope, that's basically it. They even distort, of course, because they can't tell the truth about any source. They lie about the sources, they lie about what they say, they lie about when they are written, and then they lie about everything, and then it still embarrasses them, even with the lies. It makes Muhammad into an utter complete sleazebag and proves how ridiculous Islam is and how disgusting Muhammad's behavior is.
Oh, if that little no holds barred introduction. Let me take a couple comments from the audience here. Houston says, looks like the starting time has been replaced with another time equal to or better than it. I think you mean similar to or better than, but close enough, close enough. I did abrogate the start time as he points out there. Jack Ray starting us off with a super chat.
If you want your wealth to increase in this dunya, then give sadaqah more and more every single day. Two angels come down, one of them is making dua for those who give. He says, Ya Allah, give those who give.
Says TikTok time to rock. I think you're on the wrong channel, Jack. This is not Apologetics Roadshow. I am not David Wood. Despite popular belief, so many people saying, I didn't realize you were two different people. You look exactly the same. Okay, if you say so.
Oh my.
And Nina does have a point here. She says, nah, it's Rebecca was 3. That is famous now. That does seem to be more common because they want to go for something more extreme than their prophet. We, Mary and I did do a stream on that topic specifically quite some time ago. I'll try to remember to put a link to that in case you're interested in it. And Jack says, "Oh, can I leave?" No, you can't. You can't leave despite the fact that you're on the wrong channel. You now have to stay here. Anyway, Muslims do they bring up both of these. I guess Rebecca is probably somewhat more common, but they certainly bring up Mary quite often, and they always tag on. Right? It's never Mary was 12 actually. It's always and Joseph was 90. What a disgusting pedophile that Joseph was, or something along those lines.
Which is
Even though,
so
according to
amazing.
both Islam and Christianity, Mary was not impregnated by biological sex. Weird stuff. All right, let's go ahead and bring up the presentation here.
All right. So the question is, does Mary's age validate Muhammad's marriage to Aisha? Because this is what the argument is. The argument is Mary's age, whenever, somehow means that Muhammad marrying Aisha is fine. So let's go back to our buddy Hakikachu and the argument that he makes. We have to remember that he argues that if you see little girls in leotards, that means that any male who looks at her wants to have intercourse, and because he does, right? That's what his argument is. And so he also argues that if anyone wants to have intercourse with a child, that child is sleeping around and is having intercourse with other children. and that Christians are terrible because they're not talking about slutty children who are sleeping around because they're innocent children in leotards. We can't have that because, according to Daniel Hakikatu, it only makes men like him want to have sex with them, which means they're having sex somehow. So, again, just like last time, he normatively he thinks it's normative to lust after small children as long as they're wearing swimsuits, leotards, dance costumes, that sort of thing, not covered in hijab. And he then equates his perversion with the child's promiscuity. And then he claims that, well, of course, it's normative to marry off tiny little children and for their families to arrange it so that men can have sex with them because these tiny little children are having sex no matter what. So isn't it better for them to be having sex with their husbands? And then he
Yep.
jumps to the declaration that 12-year-old Jews get married all the time. And don't you know your grandmother was really, really young? By the way, my grandmothers were both in their 30s before they married. First time. They never, neither one of them remarried. Um, one was widowed and then another one, husband died first, but neither one of them had more than one husband. And they both married in their 30s. They both had their last kid at almost 40. So I don't know what his grandmothers were doing, but that's what mine were professionals and
Hmm.
were.
Hmm.
But in his world, that doesn't happen with grandmothers because he's from some sort of backwoods place, and his families are immigrants, and they came from a normative Islamic society. Projects that on everyone else. So
So before you go on, I want to make a quick comment on that slide there. You did the censoring bubble all wrong there. I know you didn't want that poor little girl face to be exposed, but you're supposed to fuzz out her hair and leave her face perfectly visible according to the example of Ali Dawa. So you did that all wrong. I just wanted to correct you there. You're going to cause
Huge tidal wave of hormones.
to surge through all the pedophiles like Daniel, and they'll have such strong desire because they can see this little girl's hair. But of course, in reality, no normal person would be turned on by a naked child, let alone a clothed child
yeah.
in exercise clothing, for example.
Well, Carol reminded, or no, excuse me, Professor Yoffel. Oh wait, no, was it Carol who said it? No, it was Carol who said it. That little girls in leotards were ended yesterday in a knife attack in England, and based on where it was and when it might have been Daniel Hakikatu's soulmate there, his brother, who was switched in a younger body because although they have not released the name, given where it is, it's mightily suspicious.
Yeah, I had not heard of that. That is quite disturbing, whether it was a Muslim or not. Certainly disturbing either way. But if it was motivated by Islam, of course we know exactly why. You punish someone, you punish a child even for inappropriate clothing by attacking them. Um, this is Islam. But again, it could have just been some random psychopath or disgruntled parent from a divorce type situation, or any number of things
He's
could have made
17.
the
It's
case.
a 17-year-old boy.
Hmm.
So it's possible that it's something else.
Yeah, certainly it could be, good old fashioned mental illness. Who knows? But it would not be out of line with something a supporter of Daniel would think is correct.
Yep. Well, I mean, of course it's correct because why wouldn't it be correct in Daniel's worldview, honestly? So, yeah, still have not seen a release of the name, but I'm I'm making a guess here that is likely to be one of Daniel's co-religionists. So the last time uh, we compared Muhammad to Richard II, and Muhammad was buried by that because the key points are sex, lust, and modeling. So, did they have intercourse with a young bride? Did they lust after a child? And is this a model for other people to follow? Richard II never had sex with his young bride, and he died when she was just short of 11 years old, while Muhammad had sex with Aisha when she was 9. Richard II did not marry the princess for lust, but as a political match, and he had never even seen her when the treaty was made and showed no sexualization of her later on. In fact, people commented on how he did not behave in any way toward her like a husband toward a bride, but rather like an uncle toward a niece or a brother toward a sister. Muhammad married Aisha only because of lust. Remember that Aisha had an older sister who was not as white and so not as pretty, even though she was 16 at the time. Muhammad liked the white Aisha, the daughter of Ruman, who looked almost like the Houris, according to Muhammad. Richard II's marriage was not a model of ideal marriage, and in fact, it upset his nobles a great deal, while Muhammad's marriage of Aisha is idealized and is a perfect pattern for future men to follow. And in fact, Aisha, at the time of consummation, is approximately the age of the Houris in Jannah. So, um, Daniel says that info release says he's a Welsh Rwandan expat, moved to the UK at 6 with his parents. Shocking. So, this time again, we're going to deal with the same questions: sex, lust, modeling. So, first question is any source that gives Mary a young age, in any source that gives Mary a young age, did Joseph ever possibly have sex with her? And any source that gives Mary a young age, did Joseph ever marry her for lust or with any intent of ever having intercourse? Whether or not he had intercourse, did he have intent of intercourse? Then the third question, if Mary was married young in the context of her life, would that marriage have any impact whatsoever on proper Christian marriage ages for people other than Mary in the context of their lives? So, does Mary's life context transfer? Is it a pattern for people to follow? Is it a model? So we are going to answer these questions and see whether or not we can go back to the main question, which is, does Mary's age validate Muhammad's marriage to Aisha? Because your answer to all of these needs to be yes for it to validate Muhammad's marriage to Aisha. So, now,
spoiler alert, I think you're going to find some no's in that list of questions there, or list of answers to those questions.
I think most people should kind of expect some no's there. So, biblical references to her age are scant. She is called a betrothed virgin living in Nazareth of Galilee. That's it. She's a betrothed virgin. That's all we know of her. However, she is able to travel on her own authority to the home of Zechariah and Elizabeth. She's not asking anybody for permission. There's no father involved at all in her betrothal or anything else that we can tell. So this indicates, firstly, that she is most likely an orphan at this time, and secondly, that she is a manager of her own affairs. That second part's super important. So under Roman law, this would point to her being about 20, 25, or at minimum over 20, as orphans without a paterfamilias got a guardian to oversee them, appointed for them. And realistically, it's the same in a Hellenized Jewish context, because there's no indication that she consulted anyone for anything. You know, while you have certain rights at the age of 12 under later Jewish law, you don't, or actually I think the full rights for girls are like 14. Those are within the context of the family for certain things until typically you are expected to be married at least once before you're kind of out on your own. Or if your father dies, there would still be someone there. They recognize that those people are not really thoroughly adult. But Mary here consults no one. Now, there's also an interesting point. The only data point that we have for Mary's death is in the Chronicle of Hippolytus of Thebes. and there's a tradition that is preserved in it. It's a chronology. That's what it means by chronicle. So it talked about different things that happened in different worlds, years, and these chronicles were compiled from earlier sources. So you know, you would have a source that was compiled 100 years ago, and then you'd add a whole bunch of dates to it, and you'd append it as you went. So you weren't developing everything from scratch. You were taking existing chronicles and you were adding to them. So we don't have any earlier chronicles in this one that mentions when she dies, but this certainly came from something earlier. Hippolytus of Thebes would not have just made it up. How much earlier, we don't know for sure. But in this tradition, she dies in AD 41. Now, if she were in her 20s when she married Joseph, then she would have been in her 60s at death, and since she died of old age in all the Christian accounts, or was assumed in old age by the newly introduced tradition of the late Middle Ages that teach the Assumption of Mary. But at any rate, this happened in her old age. Nobody says that she died middle aged or died young or died unexpectedly. For you to die in old age, you really do need to be at least 60. So it seems very unlikely that she was younger than 20 if this AD 41 is correct. Also, there are no accounts of conversations with Mary, even though there were accounts with figures like Philip's daughters, and even second-hand accounts. There are no non-made up accounts of any conversation with Mary, even though there absolutely were accounts of conversations with people who survived into the next century and stuff. So she seems to have died reasonably early on. She could not have been super old at death, and she almost certainly was not all that old at marriage, or we would have some early tradition from her, and we do not. And so that indicates a fairly early death and thus an older age at marriage. There are some letters there supposedly from her, and those are super late fabrications. Now,
Just so the audience gets the point there, we have a couple of historical sources attempting to report history, right? They're not attempting to write theology or have other motives for making something
correct.
up, attempting to report history that suggests that Mary died in the year 41, which would make her about 60, maybe 65, something along those lines. At that time, which then you project back, and she has to be 20 at least in the year zero. Now, if Jesus was born in 5 BC, 6 BC, as is often suggested, that would push her possibly into late teens, right, or mid-teens, uh, at the absolute minimum, though, right? It could be older, right? You're saying that she'd minimum have to be that age. She could easily be older, but at minimum she would have to be that age. And we don't have any conflicting tradition. We don't have any tradition about Mary dying, being martyred, dying young, being martyred, getting
No,
disease, whatever,
she
anything
died
along
in
those
Ephesus.
lines.
Yeah, she died in Ephesus under the care of John, and all the histories are universal about that. That John went to Ephesus, and that's where Mary died, and she died long before John suffered any persecution too.
Right. Which all of the lack of conflicting tradition, this being perfectly plausible, this being a historical source or at least attempt at writing accurate history, that doesn't mean it's infallible. Doesn't mean it can't make mistakes, but it's not intentionally making things up, and it is relying on existing tradition, which is what historians use for prior histories, right? So when I say tradition, uh, sometimes people interpret that as like customs that have evolved over time and are not historical. But when a historian uses the word tradition, they mean prior historical sources. So this is not like novel original research. He's reporting what has already been, and there really would be no reason for anyone to make this up. So it seems pretty plausible.
Yeah, and Mr. Rock pointed out that lots of translations say that Mary was the cousin of Elizabeth, but the Greek word is less specific than that. It's more like kinswoman. Uh, of same kin, akin to, related by blood. So does not mean that it means that she is a blood relative rather than one by marriage, uh, almost certainly. But it does not mean that they are necessarily first cousins.
And Chris says, we're wrong. Mary must have died in Mecca like all the other prophets.
Ha! That's hilarious. That is absolutely hilarious. All right. So now there is a very stupid tendency of Christians, ancient and modern, to impose on the first century later Talmudic ideals. So the Talmud did not exist in the first century. Most of the rabbis had not yet been born yet. And the rabbis generally didn't get weird about young marriage until after Christianity. And that's why they threw out the neo-local requirements of even younger sons and tried to make all the parents marry their kids to each other as young as possible, keep them under control so they wouldn't go off and become Christians, basically. So if you get all these uppity kids nailed down with a spouse, then they won't have any silly ideas of this Christian stuff, and you can get them all like embedded in the community so they can't think about anything else, and they're super busy with their own kids, so they aren't going to go off and become Christians, basically. And remember that in Genesis, it is established that for a husband to marry a wife, he has to do what? He has to leave his father and mother's house. Now, if you were the heir of a house, you wouldn't necessarily have done that because you were in the house that's going to be yours, and that had become a tradition in previous times that they would not have done that. But by the time of Jesus, very often, they just built on another room for another couple to marry, and they wouldn't disperse until the father of the family was dead in the Mediterranean, the Indo-European style of household formation in Greece and in Rome and India and places like that. So that is not what the Bible tells you to do. So if you're saying that, oh, hey, these folks, they're super good followers of the Bible, but they're also doing something the Bible says not to do, yeah, not so much. So this Talmudic stuff came in later. Now, the Talmud steals from Roman law in a number of places, and it also, the really gross dudes tend to be Babylonian, and they steal from Sasanian traditions because the Sasanians were kind of perverts. The Sasanians thought that every woman should be betrothed at 9 and that the marriage should be consummated at 12 because they basically kept women locked up. So the Talmudic ideas of early marriage were also largely not followed even after being established. People didn't marry at the ages that the Talmud says that you ought to marry. Note that the Talmud excludes any marriage for a purpose other than having sex included for procreation. And this includes an opinion that excludes marrying young girls to old men in Sanhedrin 76a. So do not profane your daughter by causing her to be a prostitute is interpreted by Rabbi Eliezer as referring marrying your daughter to an old man, because you will cause her to look around for satisfaction with a man that she can love outside of her marriage if you do that. So you're basically like tempting her to commit adultery if you marry her to an old man that she can't love. So I also want you to pay attention to the patterns of many single people of fairly advanced ages, in addition to widows and so on, in the Bible. Peter appears to be the only apostle with a wife until after Jesus died. James, the brother of Jesus, is universally understood to have died a virgin too, and so did Paul. Now, Paul was a proper Pharisee. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He followed the Pharisaical law to a T of the time that he lived. And he was going to be in his 20s because, he was recruited, taught, and then was acting independently afterwards. So he's out of the early training phase. So he's in his 20s when he's running around stirring people up to kill the Christians. He's in his 20s and he was single and was not in violation of the rabbinical law as it was understood at that time, or he would have already had a wife. So he could not, uh, whoops, because he could not have been younger than his 20s and had the kind of responsibilities he did. So
Well, you
it's a
see, Mary,
really
this is
important
why we
point.
know that Paul is a false prophet because he did not marry a 6-year-old and better at age 9, like all true prophets do.
Ha, nice.
I
So
did want to take this
go
comment
ahead.
real quick here from
Definitely
Mr.
do that.
Rock. Alhamdulillah. Some Talmudic pervert said you can marry children centuries after Christ. This is the proof. What is the proof of something that we're always accused of? Why do you guys never criticize the Talmud? Well, because that's not what this channel is about. But we're not suggesting it's perfect just by not criticizing it,
Yep.
not mentioning it, right? I don't have to mention everything. Why do Muslims never criticize thousands of religions that they don't know exist? Well, because they don't care about them. And I don't really care about what the Talmud says because I am not a rabbinic Jew. However, if you see a Muslim suggest that, you can point them to this timestamp in the video where Mary called it perverted and disgusting and copying pagan culture.
Yep. There you go. So now here's a question. Lots of people just assume that people were young, marrying really young in Judea. However, this is again projecting expectations of the past. When people were extremely well off and extremely easy to form a household and support the household, then people tended to marry younger. If you had economic barriers to marriage, you tended to marry older. So, in this book, Jewish Marriage in Antiquity, this is a review article of it, which was a very nice summary to not dump tons of information on folks. But the actual book is called Jewish Marriage in Antiquity, and it's by Michael J. Satlow. Satlow or Satlow? I don't know. Satlow, probably. And in it, there are three basic arguments. First, individual Jewish groups of antiquity differed from each other in their understanding of marriage, usually but always not always conceiving marriage in terms of their historical and geographical context. That means the Jews were influenced by the pagans around them. Two, there is nothing essentially Jewish about Jewish marriage until Jews adapted traditions and rituals shared with their host societies into their own idiom to mark them thus. So they took things from surrounding culture and then put a veneer of theology on top of it, and then said it was Jewish. Third, just as in modern American marriages today, ancient Jewish ideals about marriage probably diverge greatly from reality, and various ancient legal prescriptions by rabbis should not be taken as descriptive. They are proscriptive. They're telling people what to do, but not descriptive. Doesn't mean what they did. Now, he argues that betrothal preceded the wedding itself in the Hebrew Bible, but Satlaw argues Jews of the Hellenistic period followed a Greek notion of betrothal rather than a Semitic one, where it was not seen as the legal beginning of the marriage. By the way, I kind of see a frequent, a little bit silly argument. It's just because people don't think about it, I guess, or don't know better, that says that Joseph was a truly good and righteous man because he intended to put Mary away quietly rather than have her stoned for adultery. That option was no longer available to him. The Jews were not allowed to have their own laws uh, carried out. So any capital punishment had to be done through the Roman system, and the Romans did not have capital punishment for adultery if the especially if the woman was only betrothed, because they had a different view of betrothal. But secondly, the betrothal then was more of a Hellenistic view and was less serious, less of a strong contractual idea. It was just kind of like an engagement now. We no longer sue each other for breach of contract if somebody breaks off an engagement. Used to be in Christian societies that betrothal was so serious that there could be a lawsuit of breach of promise if you married somebody else instead of the person that you had promised to marry. So,
So
no,
Zen Master said, "Did marriage just say people married for money?" And then he clarified financial stability.
well,
And
you
Mary
need
can
to,
correct me if I'm
yeah,
wrong, but the idea of falling in love with someone and then getting married is more of a modern idea. I'm not saying it never happened in the ancient world, but it's more that you get married and then you learn to love each other was
no,
the way.
I would strongly disagree with that.
Nope. Okay. Mary can,
Unless you
like I
were
said, Mary
elite.
can.
If you're elite, then you had arranged marriages. The common people absolutely married each other for love and always have. Anytime that you were not forced to marry, that little girls were not being forced to marry, if you were not super elite, so everybody's forced to marry everybody, people were always marrying for love. And it kind of, that's the thing that bothers me because people say that, like, oh, they used to like all have these arranged marriages. No one,
Well, no, I
no,
wasn't
no, no.
suggesting it was arranged.
But
I was suggesting that people were making a
so
practical
Thaddeus,
choice.
right now, how likely is it for a doctor to marry a janitor? How many marriages do you suppose exist in percentage wise that have that kind of gap between skills and social status in the United States today?
I would imagine they're pretty rare.
Not even 1%. So people project on the past, oh, they're finding all of these suitable mates. Well, they aren't marrying for marriage. Guess what? If you have a master's degree, the chances that you marry someone who only has a high school diploma, unless they are really financially well off, is quite low. And it's even low from men marrying a woman with only a high school diploma is quite low as well. That's like way less than 10% of marriages. People find attractive people who are within their own range, whether or not that's looks, money, their own society, their own values. And it's actually good to choose people based on values and compatibility. So again, if you went back to that French thing, the Frenchmen were like, yeah, all these women or all these girls, whenever they reach their teens, they're allowed to just go out and walk around with all these men, but they're so darn well educated that nobody can fool them. And now they're sensibly marrying and falling in love with all of these men that their parents would like them to fall in love with. And they do love them, but where's the romance? Where's the stupid things where they're running off with their, I don't know, dancing master or something? Because that really was, how marriages have always worked. And people just kind of pretend that we don't have a sort of, it's called a sort of mating, that we don't have a sort of mating now. We absolutely do. We always have. We always will. People, a lot of people kind of want the most beautiful, intelligent, romantic type of figure that you can get for you. And sometimes it's like where you fall too. So it's just facts that people do love, but at the same time, they're almost always pairing up with compatible people socially. So, well,
Well,
Cinderella
yeah,
was
okay.
a
So that,
daughter of a nobleman. So Cinderella is true. She was the oppressed daughter of a nobleman. Notice that almost all of
you
these
see,
fairy tales, they almost always have hidden parentage, a sort of mating happening, unless a lot of times it's the boy who is a mischievous character who manages to get the princess anyway. But usually the girl is well born, and then she's mistreated in some way, and then prevails anyway, and gets what is truly should have been hers because of her kindness, gentle rearing, and goodness and beauty and everything else. It's just the way the fairy tales work. So,
so let,
um,
let me rephrase and say maybe it's more that we have a misconception of the modern day than a misconception of the past, in that the kind of head over heels situation that you find in a romance movie is not normal, right? Uh, but rather people are dating people, hanging out with people, however you want to put it, who are socially compatible, and then they pick someone
yeah.
who is has a practical match. But
But even if you're head
look,
over
look, right,
heels, who are you going to be head over heels for?
Well,
And who's
someone you
going to be head
already
over heels
know,
for
right?
you?
It won't be
Right?
right. It won't be
Like,
someone that's not connected in any way that
right,
you would never have any
right.
contact with.
So,
Uh,
and it's
yeah.
someone you're going to have contact with, and
So
it's also
what
someone
I'm
who
trying to
is
get at.
appealing to you in context. So, it just is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good word there, appealing, because this word love is a little nebulous, but people have always married people they found to be appealing, right? They always married people who were their choice to get married to, and perhaps we have some misconception of the past and some misconception of the way things should be now as well. So there
Right.
you
And
go.
like just as an example, and I still remember this because it was so shocking and so pitiful. One one of the most beautiful men that I've ever seen in my entire life. My friends and I, we were out eating at a restaurant, and this guy comes up, and we just all look at each other because he's like Adonis, gorgeous man in every way, and we're all just like jaw dropped, like one in millions of people, beautiful. And then he opens his mouth, and the poor thing struggles with being a waiter. And this is clearly like he's only being employed there because he's so pretty that people give him tips anyway, and he is so far out of his depth. And then we all kind of look at each other like, wow, that's a pity, because I'm sure there's some very sweet woman out there who could love him, but
But
like
not you.
just gone. And all my friends, we were just like, oh, oh, that's a waste. So that's part of attractiveness. That's part of appeal. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
so anyway, um, so he noted that uh, Slatlow said that the rabbinic period it reinstated the type of inchoate marriage that was like the betrothal was like a marriage that hasn't been consummated yet. It's already a marriage, it just hasn't been consummated yet, but it's sealed. And that was in order to create a collective and continuous pass back to biblical times. And so, uh, and he also believes that uh, Kiddushin, which is a rabbinic term and used for betrothal, is not from the root for holiness, but is probably from the root for the standard Greek term for handing over a bride. And this is what's the word I'm looking for? It is phonetically tenable. It is a plausible phonetic position that that is where this word is derived. That it's actually taken from the Greek term to hand over a bride. Because why would the betrothal contract be the holy thing rather than the marriage itself? Why would the contract to be a holy thing? And so it's it's pretty plausible. It might be a little bit controversial, but it is pretty plausible. So he calls it marriage in Palestine, but it means Judea because Palestine did not exist at this time. So he said that while the ideal age for both men and women was in the teens, men tended to marry later. In Palestine, men married around 30 to women who are 10 or 15 years younger, while in Babylonia, the expectation was that men would marry around 20 to women in their teens. So Babylonia is the Sassanian Persian Empire, right? So there's great emphasis was placed on women's beauty, and certain complex strategies for arranging marriages by the couples themselves are assumed, including take advantages of proscriptions concerning rape. Basically, well, rape is raptus, and which means running off with the bride, not forcible intercourse in classical literature. So raptus can include forcible intercourse, or it can be just be an elopement. So, um, and the rabbis did interpret things in an unclear way. It's unclear whether or not the person who takes off with a forcible rape should be killed, or that the the accused rapist has to marry the victim. It depends on which part you're reading and how you're reading it. Because, of course, in the actual biblical text, that if you uh, kidnapping, rape is considered synonymous with kidnapping. And so that would be man stealing and would require a death penalty uh, in the early ancient world. But by this time, the rabbis were beginning to understand things differently and more horribly. Anyway, the ideal arrangement of marriage was through the fathers. However, given the age of marriage, given at the age of marriage, men and their probable life expectancy is less like, but it is likely that less than half the daughters would have a living father to arrange the first marriage, while few sons who married at an older age would have a living father when they saw a match. So 30s minus 10 is 20s, minus 30s minus 15 is age 15 through 24. Now, the implication is really that the girls are, for the most part, in their late teens to mid 20s at the oldest. And that probably does work with reality, because a lot of times, whenever we see areas in which there are kind of economic issues where it's not easy to feed your family for a lot of people, you start seeing women marrying usually in their 20s, almost always in their 20s, if you're having a hard time being your family, unless your society is just full of idiots, which some are. But the vast majority of societies where people make rational choices about whether or not they can eat tomorrow, they don't choose to marry if they're not going to be able to eat. And so they need to have a job that pays enough money that you can have kids and you won't all die. So,
Strange that food is a higher priority.
yeah, crazy, isn't it? So, I mean, it's why the word husband actually, and whenever I was going after, who was it, Annam, trying to make it, he was trying to make it mean something ridiculous, but it means house man. It means a man with a house, because you had to have the means to support a family. You had to be the owner of a house to be able to have a family. In the Middle Ages, when that word became synonymous with a married man, a houseman is a dude who's got enough to be married. So of course he's married. He's a houseman. He's got a wife. Why wouldn't he have a wife? He's got the money for it. Um, so there's also a lot of questionable stuff about the age of first marriage in Roman society. Now we do have the clearest data for the elites, and in general, the elites with young with the society has arranged marriages. In the elites, marriages tend to be quite young. Now, in the Augustinian age, fear of demographic collapse caused Augustus to impose fines on fathers who didn't marry their daughters by age 20. Now, this meant that there were a number of fathers who were not marrying their daughters at age 20. Like, they were keeping them at home and they weren't even married at age 20. If all the girls were getting married as soon as legally possible, you wouldn't have this law. Now, laws were generally unenforceable like this. You just find very few actual fines collected. There were a whole bunch of different fines, like trying to fine people for not having kids and fine people for this and fine people for that, and very little evidence that any of these were enforced. Now, again, note that elites generally marry quite a bit younger if they're going to marry at all, because some families tried to keep some of the family members single forever to keep from splitting the inheritance and stuff like that. But the question is, how did Christianity affect the marriage age of girls? So according to Daniel Hikatu, clearly the Christians would be breeding those girls the second they're able to have children, because that's what all the people did. But we find uh, on gravestones, and these would have been elites generally because other people didn't get gravestones. The usual age of girls at marriage can only be guessed at from fragmentary literary evidence, but 287 tombstones enable us to tabulate the ages of pagan and Christian girls at marriage. The modal age of the former is 12 to 15, 43%, which basically means that at this time and this location, girls were being married very soon after they began menstruating, if they were elite girls. But for the latter, it was 15 to 18, so 3 years later. So there is a 3-year delay between menstruation and marriage, which would mean that the girls made it to Tanner stage 5, full adulthood, biologically, before they were married by their fathers. How does this do for Daniel's theory? These inscriptions are probably most representative of the urban well-to-do. As I said before, they're elite. So this elite skew shows religious tendencies, but isn't good data for common people in terms of absolute ages of marriages. Now, what's really interesting is that there is a better way of looking at epigraphic evidence from funerary monuments. These are still fairly elite people. However, there are other ways of looking at evidence as to whether or not they're married or not married, depending on whether or not they're being remembered by fathers or remembered by husbands. And some people just assumed that uh, that only in some circumstances would a husband replace a father if a husband is not specifically mentioned on as wife of so and so. If that's not part of her name, they would just throw that out and not collect all the data, because they were assuming that that wasn't until your father died, whether you're married or unmarried, that the commemorating individual would switch from father to husband. However, very good data has been collected that as soon as a woman married, this actually changed to the husband rather than the father, and the father didn't have to die for this to happen. So, drawing on a large samples of Latin epitaphs for the western half of the empire, they interpreted age-specific shifts in the identity of commemorators as proxy evidence for changes in marital status. Thus, the age at which spouses replace parents as commemorators for young adults is taken to denote the usual age of marriage. In most epigraphic samples, these shifts occurred around the age of 30 for deceased men and around the age of 20 for women. Saller and Shaw concluded that men and women had commonly married in their late 20s and their late teens, respectively, and this is a different set of data, a pattern that broadly resembles so-called Mediterranean marriage pattern found in later periods of Southern European history, and that matches that data that we had before that showed the women marrying at average at 19 point something to 20 point something years in the late 19th century or early 20th century that we talked about last time. In 1994, Saller defended the underlying methodology against criticism, adduced new as of evidence from the city of Rome to strengthen the case for moderately early female and late male marriage, and provided a computer simulation of age-specific likelihood of marriage that matches the observed shifts in commemorative identity. And that's the important part, that if you run computer models over the population demographics, if you are theorizing that this age shift should match marriage patterns, then you ought to have a demography that reflects people marrying at that age. So also another note was that, more importantly, the census returns from Roman Egypt, this is specifically from the Fayum region, which had very, very high mortality. Fayum had like really bad mosquito-borne disease. It suggests a median age of marriage of 18 years for women, closer to Saller and Shaw's reading of the Roman data than that of their challengers, and indicate that while men often married in their early 20s, no more than 60% of adult men up to the age of 40 were married. And this would be a pattern that would be typical of places where, like, it's kind of hard to get enough resources together that you can support a family. So going back to the main question.
Before you go on, I wanted to comment on that, starting with Nina's comment here. Notice how you don't see any 9.
She was 9 years old!
Is not something that you find in any of these marriages. But if I'm understanding correctly, kind of a trivial, superficial look at the data suggested a marriage age of around 15 for girls, which by itself already is massively different than a 9-year-old. A 15-year-old is definitely not a child. They're not really fully adults, but they definitely are not a child either. We have these terms, adolescence, teenager, etc., to describe the difference between someone who's a child and someone who's adult and someone who's in between those two. So even if it was 15, that would already be highly problematic for Muslims who claim that it was normal to marry at age 9. Everyone was doing it. But then a more sophisticated look at the data suggests that probably most people were getting married around, or most females were getting married around age 20, not age 15. That 15 would be like the lower end, probably. That in situations where there's a lot of pressure to get married, because of your social status and getting married for purposes uh, other than love or starting a family or anything like that, political type pressure, uh, then it might be as young as 15, but the norm for regular people was around 20. And so my question is, I forget Muslims for a second, right? Because they have an obvious reason why they would make up data. But I've heard plenty of secular historians suggest that it was common for people to get married at, say, age 12, for
Because they're
example.
morons. Because they are, and they're almost always men, and this ticks me off. This is getting my female flag flying here. They don't care. They don't care because they care about battles and this social thing and that social thing, and they do not care about women. They do not care about truth. They do not care about history. They are very often garbage men who make assumptions off just wild assumptions and do not bother to uh, research the information because they do not care.
So
So that is
it's more
why
like, yeah. So what you're
it's
suggesting, I think, is that, there was perhaps there was a time where this was considered a reasonable scholarly position, and thus it just keeps getting
no,
handed
it never
down from.
was. It was
Well,
literally
I'm saying
never.
perhaps, right? Perhaps 200 years ago, before there was any data, it would not have been an unreasonable thing to say. Would have been inaccurate, obviously. But my point being,
Yeah, but
or
it still would have been
what I think you're
unreasonable 200
suggesting,
years ago because you weren't
yeah,
marrying that young then. Who
right.
are these fictional people who were once marrying at,
Well, it's got to
like,
come from somewhere, right?
and
So
so
at
what
some
happens?
point,
Yeah.
someone makes the suggestion, it becomes accepted as normal. And what you're suggesting is that historians, you put it in somewhat aggressive terms, but I'll put
Yes.
it in nicer terms. Historians are not interested generally in like day to day ordinary life. They're interested in big events, right? And so they just take for granted this common wisdom, which is in fact false.
Yeah, and there is it is true that the ancient Greeks may have more commonly married younger teens like the extreme elite, Romans did, but again, that would be the elites. So that would be the extreme elites who are arranging marriages, not anybody who was getting to choose their own partners, and they were doing it for reasons of increasing, like the increasing the family status and things like that. So
So real quick here, because this is ironic since he's like trying to think at some sort of point here. Mahmoud, our favorite propagator of child marriages, he comes in often on other topics to tell us how much he loves child marriages. But now he's saying in debate with Hikaju, inspiring philosophy, admitted that Babylonian Jews practiced young marriage. Is
yeah,
now,
the Babylonian Jews
yeah, I
did
was going to
because
say
they're
he
doing
doesn't
pagan
understand.
things, you dork butt.
He doesn't understand why this is really funny because you were talking about how in the post temple period, when they're it's called the Babylonian Talmud for a reason, right? They're in
Hmm.
exile. They're no longer in Jerusalem. They're no longer practicing Judaism the way it's always been practiced. That's when you find the Talmud being written. That's when you find inspiring philosophy. And Mary earlier in this show saying that, yeah, there was some sick people who were not following the biblical practices. I don't know how that's a defense of anything, but he seems
It
to
was
think
like,
it is.
thank you for pointing out that it's a pagan tradition. So that's really beneficial there for you to point out how it is pagan.
And John Wilson with some good advice here. No matter what Thaddeus says, I'm always on the side of Mary. Haha. Well, yeah, if I ask something and Mary disagrees, or I suggest something and Mary disagrees, you should probably go with her because she knows these things much better. But that's why I'm raising these things, because
Well,
I'm thinking probably the same way a large percentage of the audience is thinking. And it's good to get these ideas expressed so that Mary can refute them and embarrass me.
but that is things that people just sponge from society, and a lot of the time, and it's just not true. But people do sponge it from society. It's like that's what you think is true because you just imagine this previous time. Now, these early Christians actually had a completely unrelated idea of why Mary got married. It had nothing to do with the appropriate or average age of marriage. That's what's funny. So they come up with a new reason as to why he would have that Mary would have married Joseph that has nothing to do with normal or typical or good ages for normal marriage and intercourse.
Yeah,
So
so guys, pay attention to this because, as usual, the Muslim attempt proves to be hilariously stupid, right? Because they just go and they see this age of 12 or 13 or 14, depending on the text, and they're like, oh, this is proof that child marriage is acceptable and that this was normal and blah, 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 blah. Again, I feel like I need to keep saying this. There's a massive difference between a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old than a 9-year-old. But as Mary's going to point out, they don't make Mary that age because it's normal for marriage. They have different theological reasons for doing it.
right, right. So so back to the main question: was Mary young? Because before we established that a scholar who actually looked into this data, which very few have, uh, believes that people normally followed, that the Jews adapted to the norms of the society around them for the most part, especially in this period, in this pre-Talmudic times. So we've talked about what age the Romans would have been marrying, but now we're going to go back to the main question: was Mary young? And the answer is almost certainly not. She's probably between the ages of 20 and 24. I think that she was on the younger side rather than older side, most likely. But that's just my feeling. I think she had to have been at least 20 because the text indicated that she managed her own affairs. I cannot imagine a woman managing her own affairs who was not at least 20. And she was from at least a fairly poor family, and she married a lower but not lowest commoner husband. It's very important to know what this carpenter was. So, a carpenter, it can also be translated as mechanic, and it just meant a person who did skilled repair building types of work that was non blacksmith related. They are lower in social status than a blacksmith. They are lower in social status than a farmer who owns land. They are lower in social status than the highest level artisans. But they're higher in social status than a day laborer or folk or porters or something like that. So this is not he is not a master plumber. He is a journeyman plumber, and always works for someone else. In terms of today's social hierarchy, that is where Joseph would fall. So he is so, and again, this is a much more materially poor period, a materially poor time, and anybody below his level was so poor that it would be very hard to start a family at all. He is basically at the lowest level where starting a family totally makes sense and people would totally do it. So, um,
Just to confirm what Mary said there, this is actually an issue in the early church that was considered embarrassing that Jesus has this particular background of carpenter. That we think of carpenter perhaps in somewhat noble terms, right? That's a skilled craftsman, but that's not really what the term means, as Mary points out. Wasn't the lowest social standing possible, but
no.
it was not the highest by any means.
Yeah, blacksmiths were like were in that class called the skilled craftsman. The high class craftsman was blacksmiths. This is not the same. This generic mechanic term is not a cartwright, somebody who builds carts. That would be up there higher with with the blacksmith. It's the next rung below that, one rung below blacksmith into this next general social rung. And that is important context for that. So he's not somebody running around with a ton of money, and that would lead us to expect her from her own social status being someone who would marry a guy who is a mechanic, a carpenter, in the sense of mechanic that existed back then, not a car mechanic as you have now, the sense that they had back then. If you have read A Midsummer Night's Dream, those characters, one of them is a mechanic, it means that social status is what it actually means. So he he since she was marrying someone of that status, she had to be from that status, and thus we would expect her to be at least 18. These people of this social status were not marrying young. They were saving up their money and getting a nest egg and working really hard and doing all this other stuff. They just didn't have the income to marry young. So scripture already makes any argument from her youth stupid because it's exceedingly unlikely that she was very young. Now, again, people think that she's young because they assume that back then everyone married young, which simply isn't true, as we've covered before. Now, a very quick diversion. My question is Allah too stupid to know that early childbirth is dangerous for women, or is he too evil to care? So, this is an
Good
important
question.
point. Is he too stupid to know that early childbirth is dangerous for women, or is he too evil to care? And Mahmunadaz, whatever your name is, Pakistani dude, um, you need to answer this question. Is Allah stupid or evil? Because
Let's
these
go
are your
ahead and
choices.
make that a poll. So
Yes.
I'll put a poll up
So,
here in just a second. I'll wait. It won't sound like I waited, but I'm telling myself I'm waiting so that you don't see the poll before you hear us explain what the options are. But guys, there are no other possibilities, right? Because it is dangerous for a human females. Let's just be generic here. Human females to get pregnant as soon as biologically possible is dangerous, leads to a high incidence of dying during childbirth or even before childbirth. So, what's wrong with Allah? Does he not know this? Or does he not care? Because regardless of what was the cultural norm, and Mary's showing you even that doesn't work, but regardless of what the cultural norm is, Allah should know best, right? He should know, even if it was normal to get married at age 9, yeah, right. He should know that that's not healthy and should put a different command in place, right? Supposedly, he miraculously knows that alcohol is bad for you, that no one else knew at the time, even though lots of people knew that, and you can find medical texts saying as much. But this is supposed to be the miracle of Islam that he outlaws alcohol despite it being socially normative. So, why does he not outlaw child marriage, regardless of whether it's socially normative or not?
and Mahmoudaz here would have liked to stab the little girls in Southport, he says, because little girls coming together to dance just for fun, just little girls dancing, that's immoral to him. There's nothing immoral about children dancing. If they're not doing any sexual dance, if they're not being sexualized, as they would be by you because you're a pervert, you're a disgusting man who thinks that any child existing is a reason to be perverted, then there's nothing immoral about it. So you are absolutely disgusting. No, Mahmoudaz. It does not matter whether or not the girl is so small that she will die in childbirth. There is no consideration whatsoever about the risks to the girl in childbirth. So quit lying. It's just whether or not your penis will rip apart her parts and tear her vagina and her rectum into one. You don't care if she dies in childbirth. Allah doesn't care if she dies in childbirth. He does not care. That does not figure in. So Let us know whether or not Allah is stupid or evil, because those are your choices. Now, this further section will prove that even ancient people knew that early marriage was bad for women and children. So the question is Allah stupider than all these ancient people, or is Allah instead just evil that he wants women and children to die to make men's PP the happiest because he believes that sex with small girls is the most fun? So here is from Aristotle, like 500 BC-ish. He might be, he's more recent than that. See, Aristotle dates.
Real
Oh,
quick,
300, sorry,
distraction,
4th
Mary.
century.
Uh,
Hmm.
so two things unrelated to each other. Tiger asked, "Where's the option for both?" Well, we got to keep it interesting and make you think. I mean, if both was up there, that would be too obvious of a choice. So you got to pick one or the other. And then we got this guy who says, "Too many MF. I am not pedophile follower." Well, you may or may not be a pedophile follower, but you certainly are a vile person. Why in the world would you come in and say that as your first comment? Well, maybe not your very first comment. You also said this. I think this was actually your first. But, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, there's something seriously messed up. All right. So Aristotle, uh, that 4th century BC. Sorry about that. 4th century. Herodotus was around 500 BC. Aristotle's considerably later. Um, in Aristotle's politics, he is giving the ideal, what he believes to be the ideal age of marriage for men and women, and why. Yes, Mahmunidas, so that she does not, Mahmunidas points out that Islam sets the standard that you can have sex with a girl as soon as she is old enough that she doesn't die just because you have sex with her. The question is, if she survives the sex, she's old
Mhm,
enough to always survive the sex,
mhm, mhm,
get
mhm.
pregnant, she is very likely to die in birth. Is there anything wrong with having sex with a girl who is totally old enough that she won't die when you have sex with her, but she is young enough that she will have a very high chance of dying in birth? Is there anything wrong with that in Islam? The answer is no. The answer is no.
Yeah, to his credit, I mean, he did not beat around the bush here. He says, don't die of penetration. Yeah, and that is indeed the Islamic standard. Congratulations.
Now, it does not even enter into Aristotle's mind that someone would penetrate a girl who is so young that she might die of penetration. That's not even on the table. The question is, after a girl has reached the stage of menstruation, will she should she become pregnant as soon as she can? Now, what does this say? Aristotle said, but the mating of the young is bad for childbearing. For in all animal species, the offspring of the young are more imperfect and less likely to, and excuse me, and likely to produce female children. Aristotle thought that female was a defect and small in figure, so that the same thing must necessarily occur in the human race also. And a proof of this is that in all the states where it is the local custom to mate young men and young women, wait a second, in all the states where it's the local custom, so even in some Greek states, this was not the custom, Aristotle's saying. But anyway, in all the states where it's local custom to mate young men and young women, the people are deformed and small of body. And again, what happens? The young women labor more, and more of them die in childbirth. So if you get a girl pregnant, she doesn't die. She doesn't die from the penetration. There's no danger of her dying from penetration because she's actually at a menstruating age, and so her genitals are developed. And yet, she will have a harder time in childbirth and much more likely to die in childbirth. Indeed, according to some accounts, such was the reason that the oracle was given to the people of Trozen, because many were dying owing to its being their custom for the women to marry young. Now, this oracle of the given to the people of Trozen was cut not a new furrow. So basically, as soon as a woman is fertile, leave her alone for a few years, let her grow up the rest of the way. Now, Muhammad, like Mahmunidas, says that as soon as you don't rip her apart immediately, go ahead and have sex with her. If she dies, her kids die, her kids are deformed. Who cares? Who cares? Makes your PB happy to have these tiny young girls. That's the most important thing. And Aristotle says that that does not refer to harvest. Therefore, it is fitting for the woman to be married at about the age of 18. And the men at 37 are a little before. And the point for men is that he wants them married as old as possible so that their fertility windows line up with female fertility windows. So that's why he's saying that it's better for men to marry at 37 so that they're as old and as wise as possible and still in their prime and able to have kids for the next 22 years or so. Um, and that helps everything line up. For that will give long enough for the union to take place with their bodily vigor in its prime, for it is to arrive with a convenient coincidence of the dates of the time when procreation ceases, which he gave earlier as 40 for women and 70 for men. Notice how I've been using 40 as the age at which procreation typically ceases for women repeatedly. That's because that's what all the ancient folks thought. It was quite unlike or unusual for women to have kids over 40, although, of course, the elite women who were very well nourished were much more likely to do so. But for typical women, 40 is kind of it. So, Tacitus's Germania noticed how old the Germans married. He says, in every household, the children, naked and filthy, grow up with those stout frames and limbs which we so much admire. Every mother suckles her own soft offspring and never entrusts it to servants and nurses. The master is not distinguished from the slave by being brought up with greater delicacy. Both live amid the same flocks and lie on the same ground till the freeborn are distinguished by age and recognized by merit. The young men must marry late, and their vigor is thus unimpaired, nor are the maidens hurried into marriage. The same age and a similar stature is required. Well matched and vigorous they wed, and the offspring reproduce with the strength of the parents. So what is intended here is that all the German girls are probably marrying around 20, regardless of class, whereas those elite Roman girls were the most likely to marry young. Tacitus's Germania was a criticism of elite Roman customs by pointing out what was admirable about the Germans. That's what he was doing. He was writing, hey, look, in these ways, these barbarians have a barbarian virtue. And, we should imitate them in these ways. Roman boys, they were also used as marriage pawns, and sometimes they were married young too. So let's put some numbers to common sense with some hospital studies. Again, these are really hard to get. The reason why they are so hard to get is because most of these studies tend to break things at 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and so on. So incredibly few girls in any place have kids less than 15 that you have to go to places like Nigeria, where you have lots of Muslims marrying their children young and having babies. So with the limited data sets that we have, this is the first birth. Prima gravida means first pregnancy. Prima paris, I forget how it's said. But anyway, means your first birth. It says below the age of 20, the risk of mortality varied inversely with age. So low age, high risk, below 20. So prima gravidas with a stated age of less than 15 and those 15 years old had the same very high mortality, 38.5 and 41.7 deaths per 1,000 deliveries, respectively. While the 20 to 24-year-olds had a little bit more than a tenth of that, nearly 10 times as likely to die at below 15 and 15 than you are if you wait till they're 20. 16-year-olds had a mortality of 14.0. Those for 17 to 19, it was 8.0. This marked pattern of higher risk with younger age is undoubtedly exaggerated by selection bias, as there's strong local belief that home delivery is best for young girls. Prima gravida, age 20 to 29, had slightly increased relative to 20 to 24-year-olds. This is also true of every society. So you start to see a rise in risk, particularly for women that haven't had kids before, if they start having kids after 25. In all data sets from around the world, the lowest risk of having your first birth is between the ages of 20 to 25. That is the biologically ideal age. Things happen, that's not always
Mhm.
possible, but this is just simple facts. So those 30 or older had an even higher risk. You're up to 10.1. By the time you get to 40, it gets back to closer to this, closer to the 16-year-old if you have not had a kid before. Uh, in other data sets, you tend to see this U-shaped where it's really really high at the beginning and starts getting closer to that at the end. Now, very very important data here. A place that actually has enough people having kids less than 15, which is very rare. So I went to some. So this says literally uncivilized barbarians half a millennia earlier were more virtuous than early Muslims. Neat. That is true. They were indeed.
I
So,
mean, in fairness, though, in fairness to the Germanic tribes, they're not actually uncivilized. That's just the Roman characterization
well, I
of
mean, they
them.
were
They had
they.
sophisticated societies, and they
I
weren't
mean,
like
they had
nomadic. And
approximately the same technological level of sophistication as the Arab tribes at the time that didn't live in cities, like the Bedouins and the small oasis towns. Not the they had considerably less sophistication than the big oases.
yeah,
They
that's
lived
fair.
in,
I'm just
yeah.
saying that the Romans call them barbarians because they're outsiders, not because
Well,
uh, they
yes,
they
yes, everybody's
because they look
barbarian.
at them and they're like, oh, those people are just like cavemen or something like that.
Yeah, but they did specifically find the Germans to be like the primitive people, the idealized. What's the word called? The noble savage. They were the first noble savage ever, kind of in literature that later Westerners kind of copied in various ways. So, reading through this entire thing, it is so hard to get data on women younger than about 17, even 18. Why? Because so few women were having children younger than 18 in New South Wales, which had been a penal colony, right? And these are criminals. These are descendants of criminals. And this is in 1899. It is in the 19th century. And there are too few births below 17 to even calculate maternal mortality. So there's so few women. But I want to point out something here. Oh, how many legitimate children are there born per 1,000 births or 10,000 births? There are zero point 0.7 illegitimate children. So per 100,000 children born, seven of them would be born to 12-year-olds, and all of these would be victims of statutory rape or rape in our terms. None of them are legitimate. Again, not no married 13-year-olds. None. You get 3 per 100,000 children born to a married 19-year-old in the 19th century in New South Wales. Okay? And watch as the number suddenly, even at 15, you get 2 per 10,000. You get, then at 16, you get 11 per 1,000. 17, 46 per 1,000. 18, you're beginning to see a pickup, massive pickup here. Oh, look, what do you think the youngest socially acceptable age to be married in this society is? Beyond which is kind of super sketchy. It's around 18. Younger than this, you're super sketchy if you're getting married.
Yeah, I mean, you see a pretty substantial jump from 16 to 17, 17 to 18,
And
18 to 19, and then it kind of levels off after
oh,
that,
and
suggesting somewhere in that range would be the norm, uh,
yeah, and I actually
socially speaking.
misspoke. Per That's per 100,000 illegitimate births. Seven of them were to 12-year-olds. If you had 100,000 12-year-old girls in New South Wales in 1899, you would not even have one birth to a girl who was 12. Of all births, you would have 3 out of 100,000 births, whether or not illegitimate or legitimate. You would have 3 births total to girls who are 13. At 14, you have a big jump to 27, 27 births out of 100,000 children. 27 of them would be born to 14-year-olds, 89 to 15-year-olds, and then suddenly 16 to 196 because you're beginning to get into ages when it's mostly teenagers mucking around because look again at the illegitimate versus legitimate rates here,
So
and so on and so forth.
just a quick correction. I believe it is per 10,000, not per 100,000.
Oh no, I multiplied everything by 10, so I went from
Oh,
0.00
okay. It's a zero point 3
0.3 to
there.
3,
Gotcha.
so I
Gotcha.
multiplied everything by 10 as I was going on.
I
But
was like, those numbers don't add up anywhere near 100,000. And then I saw the thing at the top that says
yeah,
10,000.
that's
I
why
had not realized
yeah,
you multiplied it by 10 to get rid of
yes,
the decimal.
because the
Gotcha.
decimal is kind of like what's 0.3 children. So that's why I
Right.
said out of 100,000 children, not even one would be born to a 12-year-old. Out of 100,000 children, 3 would be born to a 13-year-old. And keep in mind, Australia, former penal colony. Now, uh, the total number of births and the marriage age you can see here. So they're doing the deciles. So 10% of births uh, by this age, 10% of the births have happened in the society, and that would be 21 years. 20% of births will have happened to a cohort by 23, 30 by 25, 40 by 27, 50 by 28, 60 by 30, 70 by 32, 80 by 35, and 90 by 38. So you see this distribution, and that first 10% doesn't get arrived at till 21 years. They're not marrying that young. And this is the only place where they had information about girls in that 15 age range because they just lumped together everyone less than 20 in this data the vast majority of time because there's so few girls who are these younger ages. So, and this is a different study, but it studies in childbirth mortality, um, puerperal fatality, and loss of offspring. And uh, this was from 1940. It's a public health report from 1940. Now, this health report was from a time when forceps were in use. So most commonly, they also had C-sections, a good deal of C-sections. So stillbirths for young mothers here are rare because of forceps and C-sections. They were not used before the common era or before the modern era. So if you go back, you would have tons more stillbirths. You would have tons more women fatalities in women because the number one cause of death in young women was that they could not get the babies out of their body and they did not have the technology to get their babies out of the body at the time. So this is with all the advances of medicine. So now you have C-sections and now you have forceps and now you have all of this. In spite of that, look at this J-shaped graph. So you see how you begin with these higher neonatal deaths that are remarkably higher than at that ideal age of 20. Now, extremely pregnancy and extreme old age has always been dangerous as well, but those are adult women taking on those risks consciously. If we had women dying from shoulder dystocia as they had been before, these U-shaped curves would be enormously higher at the front end because they just couldn't get the babies out. So these are the beautified figures where you can always get the baby out. And yet you still have this J-shape curve here. So going back in time again, so the Han Chinese girls, they had crushed feet. They were treated a little better than slaves, and yet still the ideal marriage pattern was better than Mohammed's in terms of when these men who had very low opinions of women thought that they should be marrying. So this is Childbirth in Early Imperial China by Jinder Lee, which was translated by Sabine Wilms. And she said, moreover, in my research on women's lives in early imperial China, Han Dynasty, I found that women married mostly between the ages of 14 and 18, and the statistics on women's lifespans revealed that women's death rate peaked between the ages of 20 to 30. This seems to suggest that childbirth related conditions might have been one of the major causes of death for women at the time. It always was. So, reproduction. So this was the reality of women who have recorded marriage ages. So these are the elites who are going to be marrying younger, 14 to 18. Not 12, not 10, not 8, not 9, 14 to 18. Was this considered ideal by doctors? Reproduction also influenced women's physical and emotional health. In view of the Liu Song doctor, and that's these are later, it's still early-ish imperial period, but these are uh, dynasties after the Han Dynasty. This doctor, Chen Yangzi, among women who married and undergo childbirth too early, the root of the kidneys has not yet been established, and birth then injures the kidneys, with the result that young wives have illnesses that are difficult to treat, and those who do not fall ill are also ruined. So, bad for women to get married young. Hmm. Uh,
I'm sure that they
Chu
weren't
Chung,
just supporting feminism and woke
eh,
culture. Uh,
mm-mm,
so what
would
you're
not
saying is
be.
if they had biological urges to have sex with barely pubescent girls, they would probably do so, right? Because Daniel says this is the normal biological urge of all males. Seems that he's projecting his own feelings on everyone else, as near as I can tell. Because
Yes.
I have not seen one shred of evidence in any of these studies, regardless of what the culture was, Christian cultures, non-Christian
Oh,
cultures, uh, primitive cultures, non-primitive,
look how few
uh,
of these women
the
were getting
situation.
pregnant. They were
Right.
fertile. They weren't getting pregnant because they weren't having sex. Because in his mind, you are going to have sex the second you feel that you have any sort of urge. Nobody else has this opinion. Only Muslims. It's very interesting that Muslims alone seem to hold the opinion that one having a sexual urge equates to one certainly having intercourse. So we had the Southern Qi period, or dynasty rather. He pointed out more specifically that frequent childbirth and nursing leads to blood withering and kills people. He encouraged women to marry later and have fewer births, and proposed that although in men essence penetrates at 16, meaning that most 16-year-old boys are fertile, they must not take a wife before 30. And although women's reproductive capacities are developed at 14, there's poor nutrition in general in this area than in the West at this time. They just don't have enough. It's mostly related to uh, how much protein you get, and Eastern diets are lower in protein. Uh, they must not marry before 20, otherwise, there will be intercourse but no pregnancy, or pregnancy but no birth, or birth but the child will be fragile and not long lived. Huh. Now, keep in mind that there is no thought here in any of these people's ideas that anyone will be having intercourse with children so young that they might rip them apart or kill them or damage them in some way having intercourse. These are all women who have reproductive capacity and so are considered, though young, at some level, women rather than children, and are developed to the extent that they would not be considered it would not be considered pedophilia to have intercourse with them or want to have intercourse with them, even if you had an age gap. The point here is that these women who are in Tanner stage 4 are too young to have kids. So now let's look again at what Muhammad's standards are. What does he think is ideal? So he asked his buddy Jabir whether or not he'd married a virgin or matron, and he said not a virgin but a matron. Well, what kind of virgin did he mean? A young girl, that's a word for a prepubescent girl, who would have fondled with you. That is for sexual activities other than full penetration. So he wants him to marry a girl who's so young that you would rip her apart if you had intercourse with her, because it would be so much fun to do these other things with her until you think she's old enough, and then you risk it and possibly rip her apart. That's what he's saying. And his answer was that I don't want to marry another young girl of the same age as my 9 sisters, but instead I want a woman who can comb their hair and look after them. So Mohammed wants him to marry a girl so young that she couldn't comb the hair of other children or look after other children. And Mohammed was understood correctly because he says to him, "Oh, you've done the right thing." And again, other things that she couldn't do, if he had married the age of woman or female that Mohammed wanted him to marry, could not teach them good manners, could not teach them or bring them up with good manners, could not serve them and teach them manners. So that is how young Mohammed meant, which is below any of the ages that are even considered here. Oh, and somebody else brought up Hildegard of Bingen, who was an who was a 12th century visionary nun, and she said, uh, "But little girls are not subject to menstruation. Certainly, do not conceive offspring, because their members have not yet been completed. When, however, she has reached her 12th year, now her members are in the process of being strengthened clear up to the 15th year. Now, from the 15th year clear up to the 20th, the structuring of the members is being brought to perfection. And so a woman then, when she has been perfected in her veins and in the structuring of her members, is able to conceive. If any woman conceives a child prior to the 20th year of her life, she produces a child who is weak and frail in some way." So, she says that before 12, you can't even get pregnant. Between 12 and 15, you're likely to get pregnant, but until you're 20, you shouldn't get pregnant and shouldn't have a child because there'll be something wrong with the child. So according to Allah, if he is not stupid, the ideal wife for one's personal satisfaction is a female who is a little girl. This little girl is of an age of other little girls, often at home. She is not able to look after children, teach children's manners, comb children's hair, or serve them, probably meaning dress and feed them. She is not capable of adult female work, to even be a domestic partner to her husband. She has no appreciable intellect and no contribution to the relationship in that way. Thus, Allah's prophet, and so to Allah, the most pleasurable wife is a tiny and competent child, because intercourse with her is so superior to intercourse with other women, as she has literally no other virtue to recommend her. Allah's position is that the enjoyment that men get penetrating and fondling prepubescent little girls is so great that they make the best wives for personal satisfaction, and this outweighs the damage to their bodies caused by intercourse, as well as the danger when they do reach puberty to them and their children. The fact that they will be so damaged that they will be forever inferior mothers to those children, whose children die often from neglect, is also not important to the pleasure, as important as the pleasure that grown men get from intercourse with them.
I'm sure that if he wasn't in timeout, Big Mahmood would be like, "Yes, Alhamdulillah, this is the proof of Islam. This is so it's beautiful. Mary is teaching true Islam. I am so happy. I feel peace right now."
Yep, he would, because this is why he is a Muslim. And if you are a Muslim and you find this in any way like distasteful, this is your God. This is what he is. This is what he teaches. This is what he believes. And this is your reward in Jannah, that you can have prepubescent little girls whose breasts are just beginning to bud forever. And you will like it, because there's no one who is not married in Jannah, and everyone's going to get what they want. So he is made to like it.
Maybe that's what the study that Daniel was referring to. Maybe it was done in Jannah.
Yep. If you want to take a few things, I am out of drink again. So.
Yep. Mary is running away, so we'll take some
I'll be
super
right
chats.
back.
So Joshua Wooden.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
Hello, brother and sister. Do you have a ballpark time that your, meaning Mary's, Quran will be available? I already have a Robert Spencer signed critical Quran. So I'll double check with Mary when she comes back, but I'm sure she'll say not for a couple years. Thank you very much for that donation. So Morkay says, if God is unable to enter his creation, then how would he have sex with Mary? And that meant nothing bad, but what Muslims say. Well, we don't need to think about these things. The answer is Allah knows best. So whenever Allah enters into creation in the Quran, you just say that that has some other meaning than what it appears to have. And therefore, it is not as it appears. Now, Muslims would say that, of course, God doesn't have sex with Mary, but they would claim that Christians believe that, and that's what makes Christianity wrong. So this isn't really a contradiction in what they're saying. They're saying it's an absurd idea. You just got confused because we don't actually believe that, and it's a ridiculous
but it gets
straw
better.
man.
It gets better.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, does Allah have sex with Mary in the Quran?
I mean,
His
not
spirit blows
really.
inside of her vagina. His
Yeah.
spirit penetrates her. She is penetrated by Allah. So yes, Allah does have sex with Mary. So she's a virgin. No, your God had sex with her in your filthy book. She is not.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily fair, right?
I think that blowing into her vagina is very clearly penetration. She is penetrated by Allah. There's no way around that. She is penetrated by Allah. And if you go, well, it wasn't with a penis, sorry, she's penetrated by Allah. That is rape according to any court, because penetration with any object is rape.
I mean, it was consensual, right? So.
Well, I don't know whether or not she gives. I don't think she gives any consent in the Quran at all. So it's not really.
Anyway, so we did have a real question for you, Mary. Any ETA on your Quran translation?
Oh, I'm dropping stuff into the into my book or into my online. I've realized that I hadn't been putting anything online, and let me drop that into the chat. Let's see. My Google Drive.
Well, you're putting that link in here. Una is doing a perfect impersonation of Muslims. You won't blindly accept my faith in Christ. This is so disrespectful. It hurts my feelings. This is Christophobia. This is literal oppression. I am such a victim. I think that's about the level of argument we hear from Mahmoud, but not just him. Many, many, many Muslims the same way. Islam is true, very strong. We big, we strong, we dominate. You hurt our feelings. We're victims. Shut up. We must oppress you. We must censor you because it hurts our feelings. Such a contradiction. Such a contradiction. And then there was a related super chat also from Joshua Wooden.
If you want your wealth to increase in this dunya, then give sadaqah more and more. Every single day, 2 angels come down. One of them is making dua for those who give. He says, Ya Allah, give those who give.
Joshua said, in August, I went to see if I can get a signed Usama Dakdok Quran. And is there a way when yours is out? If there is a way when yours is out, I would be honored to buy a signed one by Mary.
You
Any
can
comments,
absolutely bring
Mary?
it to anywhere that I am, and I will sign it for you whenever it comes out. I'm probably going to do two versions. One will be the extensive footnotes, because you might notice if you open any of those that I dropped there, that like there's one or two lines of text and then bam footnotes for everything else. So like there's almost a page of footnotes for every three or four uh, uh, verses. So I am probably going to do a massively condensed one that is more friendly to most people, and then do a multi-volume expanded one.
So let's follow the logic here of Mahmoud, okay? So Allah is neither stupid or evil. If women can't handle Islam, and by Islam we mean getting impregnated at an
And
age that
dying.
causes them to die in childbirth, if they can't handle childbirth because they're too young, and they want to live a Western lifestyle where they stay alive from not having childbirth at too young an age, that is their problem. We don't tolerate feminism like you Christians do. So, so saying that women should have give birth for the first time when their body is fully developed and is capable of doing so in a way that doesn't harm them is apparently feminism, and Islam stands for the death of young girls, young women, however you want to put it. And if you don't like that, that's because you can't handle Islam. I guess this is why women are deficient in religion, because Allah creates them in such a way that they die during childbirth that He caused.
Yeah. So again, Mahmoudaz, you're basically saying that not killing women in childbirth is feminism. So a proper value of women is that your PP is so important that they should die for it. They should die so that your sex is more enjoyable. And that is the value of a woman. Do you agree that it is so important that you have sex with little kids that women should die so that Muslim men can have sex with the little kids? So that is the question. Women are going to die if you have sex with them that young. They're going to die in childbirth at high rates. So, is it your position that women's value is such that they ought to die for your penis to be happier?
Mark Fish asks if you can print your Quran on toilet paper, Mary, special edition there. I
It's
would
only the
suggest,
Arabic that
however,
would count, though.
yeah,
It
I,
has
was,
to be
I
the
would
Arabic.
suggest you're better off just getting the Arabic, which is public domain. You don't have to worry about copyright or anything. Print it on some toilet paper, and then it will be pure Quran with no commentary. I mean, Mary's going to have a one sentence translation and half a page of notes that are her commentary, basically. So why would you want to use that as toilet paper? You'd basically be using Mary as toilet
Ha!
paper instead of the
It's
Quran.
it's going to be because it's going to have to be multiple volumes. It's going to be like pretty good size shelf for the more complete version. For the redacted and condensed version, it will be more manageable, but the complete version is going to be it's going to be a shelf, guys. It's going to I have to separate all of the different surahs in their own uh, in their own files, because whenever I was trying to deal with Word files that were larger, what would happen is that my computer completely ground to a halt. I bought a nicer computer and it still ground to a halt. Could not handle uh, these files of more than 500,000 words. So it's about 500,000, and then Microsoft Word is like, nope, I'm done. I'm done. 500,000, that's it. So we're we're dividing things up into smaller pieces now. So every surah is fine. So
And Jack Ray with a very good pun here made me laugh. Toilet paper Quran is copy wipe. So Mahmoud says it's normal for men to be attracted to younger girls. Well, no, it's not normal to be attracted to girls.
Oh, by the way, I just
It's
showed
normal
this.
to be attracted to slightly younger women. So
And
if a 30-year-old will not be generally will not be attracted to a 16-year-old, a 19-year-old will be attracted to a 16-year-old. Normal men prefer women close to their own age but slightly younger, and normal women prefer men close to their own age but slightly older, as
so
the
again, I
data
yep.
backs.
And last week I covered this in exhaustive detail, showing that you are only filthy, disgusting perverts like little girls across cultures. That across cultures, men like girls or men like women who are slightly younger than them, boys like girls who are slightly younger than them, and girls like boys who are slightly older, women like men who are slightly older. So I am glad that you have shown that you think that the value of women is such that they ought to die to please your penis. You are a
Yep.
very good example following your prophet. You are the first Muslim that I've met who is not a better person than his prophet, although you
Yep.
probably haven't murdered anyone. Have you actually murdered anyone? Because if you've murdered someone, then you might be as bad as your prophet is, but you're getting very close.
Yep. He said as long as she's big enough. So he says if the penis fits, you must acquit. Wait, sorry. Um, and then we have another presumed Muslim here, Batters, says there was no age of consent in those days, and there was no schools or teenage years. Girls were getting married off when they reached puberty, and boys went to work.
And I've already
You've
shown that
just
that's
drawn this
false.
from your imagination. So
Yep.
you just came in. Go and look at the actual data presented in this program to see that your imagination does not fit reality. Good question. Will the toilet paper Quran be 3 ply?
Nice. It would have to be an odd number for sure. All right. So now, an early age for Mary getting married shows up in later Christian legends. The it does not fit the biblical narrative, but it doesn't matter. They're being made up for other reasons. It does not fit. It is not true. So uh, now these legends attempted to appear appropriately Jewish to seem authentic. Uh, and they can't possibly be true, and they always directly conflict with the text of Scripture that says that Mary was only betrothed to Moses when she conceived, only betrothed. Mary was also clearly a commoner in status, with her husband Joseph as a carpenter, being rather mechanic, as I explained before. This was a status below that of a landowning farmer or blacksmith, as I explained. But the legends tend to make her nobler and even incredibly rich due to the Davidic lineage, and so assign her all these upper class traits. Now, the Proto Evangelium of James is the main and earliest legendary source for early Mariology, and it dates from the mid to late 2nd century. 2nd century, thus being written long after all witnesses were dead. And the point was to defend Mary's virginity against Jewish slander and to even establish that she was a perpetual virgin. This was all written at least 100 years after she died. It was written after everything in the New Testament. All scripture was done for decades, and then this was written. And the point was, again, to defend Mary's virginity against Jewish slander. So it's a made up story to say that no, she's really, really a virgin, and here's why, but it's all made up. Now, later legends take the virginity for granted and have other concerns, uh, but have other concerns, other preoccupations, because dialogue with slanderous Jews was no longer taking place much. So we have our earliest legend. Its whole reason was to defend Mary's virginity, and then much later legends that had other preoccupations and other ideas. So note the questions: sex, lust, and modeling. In any source that gives Mary a young age, did Joseph ever possibly have sex with her? No, the point is to stress that she's a virgin, forever, an eternal virgin. And any source that gives Mary a young age, did Joseph ever marry her for lust or even for intercourse of any sort? No, the point is to stress that Joseph never considered making her not a virgin at any point. If Mary was married young in the context of her life, would that marriage have any impact whatsoever on proper Christian marriage ages for people other than Mary in the context of their lives? No, all the texts have odd or arbitrary reasons for her age of marriage that make no sense in the text.
Yeah, so I will. So you're 100% dead on that these texts are not historically reliable. Now, 100 years by itself wouldn't be fatal, but it's written for a specific theological purpose. And the story itself is absurd, right? Mary is in the temple from very young age, uh, which is just ridiculous at face value. And then they're afraid that she's going to defile the temple by menstruating, so they need to marry her off. They choose Joseph because he's very old and would not desire her. Uh, the story doesn't lead to any historical credibility, and it's written for a clear theological purpose, which would make it useless for the Muslim, even if it was true, it would make it useless for the Muslim arguing this. I will, however, push back very slightly and say that if actual scripture said that Mary was 12, that probably would have some meaning to Christians, right?
Well, not in the context of why she gets married in the story, and we'll see why. Because it's
Right,
just
right, right,
about
right. I'm
biological
saying,
facts.
right.
So it
I'm
wouldn't,
saying,
yeah.
I'm saying if, right, if God actually chose to impregnate her at 12, it probably would have some theological significance, right? Because she is specially chosen. It's not like just a random character in the text. Of course, that doesn't
But
exist,
that doesn't mean,
so it's
but it also,
theoretical.
yeah. But it
Eh,
also, would it cause people to think that it's good for other 12-year-olds to get pregnant? No. That
I think
even
that
if
they
she,
would think that they would potentially say that it's
they would think that
acceptable.
it's the minimal possible age.
Yes, yes.
That would be the minimal, and that was already the minimal possible age. It was about biology, as we will cover in a second. So the final question is, in any version of the myth, does Mary ever have Jesus when she is 12 years old, laying aside the fact that the birth will be considered miraculous and without either pain or danger? No pain nor danger. And in fact, she has a birth with hymen intact, and that's a big part of a lot of these stories, as weird as that is. Does she ever even have him when she's 12? And the answer is no. No, she's never 12. Even there, she's not 12. So Daniel Hikikitu and the particular one that I was like, oh, Mary got pregnant at 12. Not in any version of the story does she get pregnant at 12. So the Proto-Evangelium of James is the most famous and the first and the most widely distributed. And it gives her father the name Joachim and her mother Anna. And Joachim is called exceedingly rich, which makes absolutely no sense. They're infertile, but get visited by angels promising them a child. He then gets purified of his sins, which he sees somehow in the priest's plate when he goes up to the altar to make an offering of more than 100 animals. Very, very rich. After which Mary is born. At age 3, she is taken to the temple to be raised. So this is trying to make her like Samuel, who was raised in the temple. But there's absolutely no reason for a girl to be raised in the temple anyway. And there are all sorts of embroidered things to this. So,
So just
oh,
quick
whoa, whoa,
note
whoa.
here.
Muhammad Oz says that women are protected. Are women protected by being killed in childbirth? So, are women protected
Protected, huh? Protected from what?
by being killed in early childbirth?
It's a very good question, and I can answer to that.
Because you've
But
already
I just want to make
said
a quick.
that you are killing women deliberately because you hate feminism and women need to die. If they're going to die having a baby at 12, they should die. Now you're saying they're protected. You've already said you're killing them, and that's fine with you. It's Munadas. Who are the external dangers here? Who are the external? What will happen to the women? Who will hurt them according to the Quran? Who will hurt the women? I need you to answer that question
Yeah,
now.
what
That
are
must be your next answer.
those external dangers? I mean, we'll see what he says,
Nope.
but the
You
answer
need
is
to tell
obvious.
me who presents the external dangers according
Yep.
to the Quran.
Who are the external dangers that you're
Who is the
referring to?
one who is going to hurt the women? Answer that question or you're going to be timed out for the rest of the time. All right? According to the Quran, it says who's going to hurt them. Who is it? So,
I did want to make a quick note here, which is not directly related, but a very common misconception. People hear the term Immaculate Conception, Catholic doctrine. They think that this is about Jesus being born without sin, and it is not. It is about Mary. It is about exactly what Mary is describing here in this story, how her parents are cleansed of sin, and then Mary is supposedly born without sin. That is
yeah,
what the
without
Immaculate
original sin.
Conception.
Yep.
Yeah, without original sin. That doesn't necessarily mean she never sinned, but she's born without original sin, the only human being to do so. That is what the doctrine refers to. I hear so many people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, misuse this term. Don't.
Okay. He has admitted that the other men outside will do that. My question is, who are the men? Men
Who are
will
those other
target
men?
women. What kind of
Hmm.
men? Who are the men targeting women?
Hmm.
According to the Quran and the circumstances.
Yeah,
Who
I mean,
was the man who was yelling at Sauda? Who was he? Who are the men
uh-huh.
who are being awful
Yeah,
to
yeah,
women?
yeah. In your beloved Pakistan, who are those men, outside men, who will attack not properly veiled females? Hmm. All men, he says.
Nope, and it's not true. It's just about Muslim men. And again, what does this show? I know you're really stupid, but what does it show? How many 12-year-olds out of 100,000 births, most of these 12-year-olds could have probably like 50% of the 12-year-olds could have a kid. Maybe a little less. Let's say 25% of all 12-year-olds could have a kid. Out of 100,000 births, there's not even one. By the time you hit 13, during the 13th year, 75% of these girls could have a child. Are men having sex with these 13 years olds in this previously criminal area? Criminals were brought over here. Criminals were brought over here to Australia. This is a previously criminal colony. Are these 13-year-olds having intercourse even though they could all get pregnant? Yes or no?
So Mahmoud has confirmed the logic here. He will attack a woman who is not veiled. Therefore, it is a mercy of Allah to tell women to veil and to tell men to attack women who are not veiled. This is for the mercy and protection of women. Some amazing logic here. It might be a bit circular.
Oh, by the way, Snoopy, it turns out that the reason uh, that Ali Dawa, that his wife used the whiteboard, is that she didn't want to talk because people are so nasty to her because she is a black woman married to an Arab man. And she must have an accent or something that is typical of the place that she came from. And so it's to be, and it says that he's had to hold back his wife from assaulting other women because of the nasty things that they've been doing, and that she wasn't a niqabi before they married, but now she wears a niqab because of other Muslim women and the nastiness of their activities and actions.
Hey, she's wearing it for the correct
So,
reason then, so she can't be recognized.
yep, that is exactly it. So she can't be recognized, even
Wow.
though she is not niqabi. So again, I know that Muslims are a whole bunch of rapists if they follow the pattern of Muhammad. And that is what you have said. Yes, because you are an evil pervert, but that's not why she used a whiteboard. It's because of other women being nasty. Now, I know that you are a sick pervert and would have sex with small children, but I have already shown that so few women under the age of about 17 have kids in any of these historic sources to find that one chart from 1940 that showed what it did. And again, because it was 1940, it was the only
Uh,
reason that they had any data on girls as young as 15 is because it was like the this enormous hundreds and hundreds of thousands of women, because so few girls that young had kids, that to get that data is incredibly difficult in Western society. That was because these women, these girls, are not running around having sex the second that they feel a sexual urge. That only happens in Islamic contexts because Islam uniquely teaches that men are unable to contain lust. I don't know of any other culture that teaches that both men and women are totally unable to deal with lusts. But
Yeah. So
the Chinese didn't, the Hindus didn't, the South Americans didn't. Like, I can't think of any culture. There is an Amazonian tribe that I know of that believed that basically women owed sex to men in the cohort to which they were assigned. And if women went off into the bush without another woman, it was an invitation to be raped. So that is, you have to go to a primitive, evil Amazonian tribe to get to the level of depravity. And I don't know how many ethnographic studies that I have read in my life. Dozens, dozens. And you can't find this depravity hardly anywhere except in Islam.
well, you see, Mary said that there wasn't one anywhere, and then she thought of one.
Yeah, I did think
So
of one. I did think of one. They don't do that anymore, though. Why wouldn't they do that anymore, Thaddeus? What do
feminism,
you think
feminism.
changed? No, no, it wasn't feminism. It was, oh, wait, they all became Christian. So they talk about how they used to do that and they don't do it anymore. And, oh, again, there are societies that used to push women into marriages at very, very young ages, and they all stopped doing it when they became Christian. Funny. Same with like not headhunting anymore, not marrying off daughters the second that they start bleeding, or even before in one of these cultures. Suddenly stop doing it as soon as they become Christian. Wild! It's almost as if Christianity teaches that women are not trash and only for the use of men sexually and should otherwise have no value. So,
Okay, so we do need to stop bowing to the troll here, but I got to get both these comments up because they're both such amazing logic here. So he says that a woman's voice is her aura.
yeah, it means
A
her.
woman's voice will attract men to her.
It
Her
means that it's
nakedness,
her genitals.
specifically. Yeah,
It's
her
her genitals. It's
nakedness.
her private parts.
So according to Mahmoud, no woman should ever show any skin or ever make any noise because that might attract Muslim men to her. Uh, maybe she better not like stand in a position that could possibly reveal her body shape. That might turn someone on.
Oh, you
Uh,
can't even if you are in Saudi Arabia when they have the Islamic police. If you were waiting too long somewhere, they would come and run you off if men could see you. Be like, oh, men from that cafe over there can see that you are a female in public and not with a guardian. You need to leave.
yeah, because
So,
that might tempt someone, right?
yep.
Merely knowing that there's a female underneath that garment
Hmm.
might tempt someone. So I think the logic here is basically women should stay in the bedroom 24/7, waiting for their husband to come and climb on top of them, and that is their only purpose.
Yep.
I think is the logic here.
They
If
are
taken
trash,
to its
and if they die,
conclusion.
they deserve it because the
Uh-huh.
only thing
Oh
that they're
yes,
good with.
yes. Don't forget that part.
Yep.
If they have the nerve to die in childbirth, that's because they couldn't handle the beauty of Islam,
Yep.
and they will be condemned to hell for that. Not my logic. This is Mahmoud's logic, and he's proud of it, right? He says he he would not disagree with what I'm saying. He's saying everything you're saying is correct.
You
Uh,
find
th-
peace in it because you are a son of Satan. That's why. Because you are a
yeah, I mean,
disgusting son of
so
Satan.
look at this logic here, right? If someone finds peace in something, then it must be from God. Is the logic here? What if serial killers find peace in Mary?
Dismembering people and
Hmm.
torturing people.
Hmm.
So clearly they follow your same prophet.
Yeah, it must be from God. It's killing people and dismembering them and dissecting their body and looking at all the intricacies of their severed body parts. That must be from God, according to Mahmoud. On the other hand, some people find peace in stopping Islam. Hmm, that must also be from God. Because I certainly find peace in combating Islam, find peace in knowing that I'm fighting against evil every day of my life. Uh, hmm, maybe you should find a different standard than it gives you peace for whether something is true or not, or whether something comes from God or not. Or you'll have to say that literally every idea that exists is
That
from
someone
God
likes.
because it brings peace to someone, right? No matter what activity you're talking about, drinking alcohol brings peace to a lot of people. But according to Allah, that's wrong. Like really, really wrong. Eating pork brings peace to some people. I mean, everything, literally any activity you could possibly imagine, there'd be someone who says this gives me peace. So get some logic, please. All right. Let's try to stay focused now and ignore the moron.
Yeah, I'm gonna time him out if he keeps being gross because it's just too disgusting. Um, want to do certain other things to him. But we will continue on. So here is the actual text translated, obviously. And the child was 3 years old, and Joachim said, invite the daughters of the Hebrews that are undefiled, and let them each take a lamp, and let them stand with the lamps burning, that the child may not turn back, and her heart be captivated from the temple of the Lord. And they did so until she went up into the temple of the Lord. And the priest received her and kissed her and blessed her, saying, the Lord has magnified your name in all generations. In you, on the last days, the Lord will manifest his redemption on the sons of Israel. And then he set her down on the third step of the altar, and the Lord God sent grace upon her, and she danced with her feet, and all the house of Israel loved her. So clearly, this has all the trappings of a folk tale. The spontaneously invited daughters of the Hebrews, why would they listen to this random man? Why would this priest have any idea that she was that special? Like any of this, it's all it reads like a fairy tale. And then because we have to make her super special, she was fed by the angels inside the temple until she is 12. Then, very important, the council of the priests came together and decided what was to be done with her, because if she started menstruating in the temple, she would defile the sanctuary of the Lord. So this is the pretext for her being married off, that she would become unclean, and she's in the temple. And I have no idea where they think this poor girl is living, but because there were parts of the temple complex where the high priestly family and their servants lived without a problem, including women, and a boy was hidden there with his wet nurse for many years. But somehow now these parts of the temple no longer exist because it's not convenient for this story. So the pretext here is that she's so
Well,
special.
in fairness, Mary, this is written more than 100 years after the
Yes.
destruction of the temple. The author probably didn't really have a very good idea what the inside of the temple looked like.
Yeah. Um, so, but they had the Old Testament, and the Old Testament talked about the way he
Uh,
was and all of this stuff. Like, and then whenever the queen hears that this boy is alive, she rises like he's been hidden from her, even though they're in the same city for years and years. The temple complex is large enough for that, but somehow this gets forgotten. But anyway, the high priest is now Zechariah of the Bible, which is utterly ridiculous. In this entire period, he could have been Simon, Matthias, um, Joazar, Eleazar, or Joshua. Those are the only possibilities within this entire time frame for this event. But somehow it's Zachariah,
Because
Elizabeth's
that's the
wife.
name that the author of the
Yeah,
text
knew.
knows,
Yep.
Mary. He doesn't know the actual history.
But he should know that this person is not a high priest because he's
Yeah, he
going
should
through
have just
such
made
a
up a name
service
or something.
period.
He
Like
would have been better
he
off
could have,
making up a
yes, he
name,
would have
but
been better off marrying this off. But then an angel comes to him in the Holy of Holies in this account and says, go out and assemble the widowers of the people and let them each bring his rod, and to whomsoever the Lord shall show a sign, his wife shall she be. So the point of widowers and that the widowers are going to have a wife is that they intend to keep this girl as a virgin forever, so they are picking widowers because a widower who has kids already would not be deprived of having offspring by having by marrying her, and also would be less likely to treat her as anything other than a daughter. So Joseph is chosen among the widowers by lot and by a dove coming out of his rod. The high priest said, "You have been chosen by the lot to take into your keeping the virgin of the Lord." That is, the widowers were chosen to keep the virgin a virgin. Joseph then refused, saying that I have children and I am an old man and she is a young girl. I am afraid lest I become a laughing stock to the sons of Israel. So, according to this, Mohammed married Aisha and had intercourse with her. Aisha was literally half the age of his youngest child when he had intercourse with her. What should be the reaction, if not horror, because she was only 9? Let's imagine that she was actually 12 now, so the minimum legal age rather than an actual child, and that she had her menses and stuff. But let's pretend that she is a young, technically marriageable girl instead. What would the reaction of everyone be to Mohammed, a widower with children older than her? What should their expected reaction be?
They should expect him to be. See, the problem is it doesn't work, but I'm going to say it anyway. They should expect him to be doing it because she needs a guardian, and
Well,
this
no,
is the
no,
most
he's
convenient.
actually having intercourse with her. But what does he say that what will happen if they think that they're marrying her and that's a true marriage and it's consummated? He says, "I'm afraid lest I become a laughing stock." And his
Right,
specific
right, right, right.
reasons is that I have children. I am an old man. She is a young girl. Mohammed has children who are older than she is. That's kind of what's implied here. He is an old man. She is a young girl. And so what would happen? He should expect to become a laughing stock. Joseph is embarrassed lest people wrongly think he is a gross old man marrying a young girl for intercourse. So,
Which is odd though, because he put his name in the drawing, didn't he?
well, he had to. It's required. They forced them all to come.
Oh,
So
okay.
it says,
I thought it was volunteers,
no,
but
no, it's
I
not
guess not.
voluntary. Go out and assemble the widowers of the people.
I see.
Let them each bring his rod, is not allow them to. That's a command.
So actually, that's pretty telling in and of itself, right? That they are have to conscript people into this because
Yes,
no one would want to do it.
right. And so he immediately goes, "No, some disgusting pervert might get the wrong idea that I am a disgusting pervert. But who is the disgusting pervert? Oh, that's Muhammad. That's also every Muslim who tries to bring this up as a point. You are a disgusting pervert if you think that in this account, they had there was some sort of intercourse at all in view. The high priest then threatened him with God smiting him if he refused because he's been chosen by lot. So, in fear, he agreed. He agreed out of fear that God would kill him if he didn't. So, again, what's a pedophile? It's someone who has sexual attraction to a prepubescent girl. Is Muhammad a pedophile? Yeah, because it was
Well, that depends, right? Because apparently Allah forced him to have that marriage, as what's his name told us, right? When he was on here, he's like,
yeah,
this is my defense. Muhammad really didn't want to have sex with her, but Allah made him do it.
which is
So,
utterly nonsensical because of
well,
course,
I mean, forget whether it has anything to do with reality. He's taking the pedophile away from his God, his prophet, to put it on his God, and he thinks this is some kind of save. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But
So
j- just
yeah,
to
but it's
recap here, right?
uh-huh.
The
Oh,
one
wait
and
a second,
only
hang on.
reason that Mary is being married at the particular age she's being married at, whether that be 12 or 14 or whatever, depending on which version of the story you're looking at, is because that's the age of marriage? No. Because Joseph desires her? No. Because the priests are afraid they might be tempted into desiring her? No. Because she's about to start menstruating. That is literally the only reason that her age is exactly what it is, and why they need to marry her is because she needs to get out of the temple before she accidentally spills blood on the holy ground, which will defile it according to Jewish thought. Doesn't seem to have anything to do with sex. Doesn't seem to have anything to do with marriage, really. It's just about her blood potentially getting on the temple
Right. So
ground.
they're essentially assigning a guardian to her and assigned to do that through marriage, which is of course ridiculous. But this is to build up this idea of the perpetual Virgin Mary, who was never even considered a candidate for intercourse. That's the point of this, is that they're turning the marriage into a guardianship. So question is
Yeah, I
Joseph
mean, literally the author's purpose, right? He creates this narrative, right? He in the story, the purpose is because she is about to menstruate, but really he's crafting this story in order to prove that she must be an eternal virgin, right?
Yes.
That's actually the author's purpose. So he
Yes.
creates this fanciful story, puts her at age 12 because that gets her out of the temple, and then marries her to an old Joseph, although no age, exact age is given. Definitely old, right? Gives it
Yep.
or old Joseph. So there's no possibility that any normal person would want to have sex in this situation, proving that she didn't have sex and she was the eternal virgin. That is the purpose
Exactly.
of the story, and this somehow is analogous to Muhammad.
Yep. Yep. And yes, Moore points out that women were not allowed past the court of women. Gentiles were in the court of Gentiles. The only ones in the inner sanctuary was priests. Yes, this is a completely fictional story. It's completely ridiculous of her being put in the Holy of Holies. And other later versions of this have entire cadres of these virgin girls who are serving in the temple just because. The only women who could serve in the temple would be women serving in the court of the women, and they wouldn't go beyond that court at all. There were female musicians that participated in large festivals, but they did not enter those inner areas. So this is totally made up, and the reason it's made up is to create this whole she really had to be a virgin because of all of this. So you are supposed to see this and think no one in this position could rationally think that intercourse and lust are involved here. So if you think that, then you are
Again,
outside the bounds of conceivable decent behavior. So
again, the purpose of this story is to say an old man, let's say, in his 50s. I think that's a more realistic age for Joseph in this story. The 90 age comes from a much later text. And the original Protevangelion, he's probably in his 50s or something. They put him at that age because it's inconceivable in that society that a 50-year-old man would want to have sex with a little girl of age 12. And think about that. Just think
yep,
about what that means, right? If it's inconceivable, and that's why the author picks these particular details, and then the Muslims tell us it was perfectly ordinary for 50 something year old men to marry 6-year-old girls.
exactly. Exactly. So what does this turn Mohammed into? Someone completely outside the bounds of any civilized society and any conception of civilized behavior. So continuing on, did Abu Bakr hand over his 9-year-old daughter for sex? Yes. Did the priest choose a husband for Mary with any thought that the husband would have intercourse with her? Or did they choose the kind of husband for Mary who would be specifically least likely to want to have intercourse with her? So the Jewish priest chose old men with children to never touch the special Virgin of the Lord, even after she becomes a woman, while Mohammed chose Aisha, 9 years younger than his youngest child, who is 9 years old, to have sex with. So,
I just want to say that one more time. This is so perfect, right? This is the text, the story
yes,
that Muslims indirectly appeal to.
yes,
And it says that it's inconceivable in that society for a man to do what Muhammad actually did according to the Islamic texts.
exactly. So This is then followed by a virginity test in which Mary is miraculously chosen to make a new veil for the Holy of Holies. This is after their marriage, and that confirms that Joseph didn't touch her. So while she is making this veil, the announcement that she is chosen by God to bear Christ comes. She finishes making the veil, and then she visits her cousin Elizabeth. So there's no clear idea of the elapsed time between this. But we do find out that she was 16 years old when these mysteries happened. So mysteries is plural. So probably this whole thing started when she was 16. And she was in her 6th month, and behold, Joseph came back from his building, and entering into his house, he discovered that she was big with child. So she was 6 months pregnant and that's apparently she teleports. She doesn't have to walk back. She's able to teleport from her cousin Elizabeth's house. And this means that she is 16 minimum, perhaps 17 when she gives birth, because she is 16 years old when she gets the announcement that she will bear a child. Don't know how far into her to being 16, but she's at least 16. So she might even be 17 by the time she has a kid. Then Joseph discovers that she's pregnant, and he thought someone had defiled her, only to have an angel tell him otherwise. So another proof of virginity. Now an angel tells him. Now the priests find out, and then they test both with the water of the ordeal of the Lord, which is supposed to be following the bitter waters test, although they don't seem to understand it very well. But that again confirms her virginity miraculously. So we have now had chosen for virginity. He swears he will never touch her. She has a miraculous virginity test. An angel comes, announces the pregnancy. She goes to Elizabeth, and of course, the events with Elizabeth knowing that she's pregnant already and all that stuff happens. She walks back home, and we get another confirmation of virginity from an angel, and then the priests find out, don't believe them, and they're both tested, and together they publicly prove their virginity, that they haven't had her virginity and that he hasn't had intercourse with her, and it's proven miraculously again. Then Joseph takes her to a cave in Bethlehem for the census, and there she goes into labor, and he fetches a midwife who then testifies that even after birth, she remained a virgin. So she's saying that she has a hymen after the baby came. And she tells this to a friend as a declaration of this miraculous thing. And then during this entire thing, Joseph goes, she's counted as my wife, but I've never touched her, and she's totally a virgin. And then the midwife's like, oh my goodness, she is a virgin because she still has a hymen, even though she's given birth. And then she tells a friend, and a friend says she won't believe her unless she tests Mary's virginity herself, which for some insane reason Mary allows her to do because this is a stupid story. And then her hand starts falling off as she cries over her disbelief. Oh, shame on me for not believing. And then an angel told her to pick up the baby, and that miraculously heals her. So an absolutely insane story, start to finish. But the whole point is that every couple of paragraphs, there's a proof of her virginity in it, showing that she was not only a virgin when she conceived, but was a virgin when she gave birth, and perpetual virgin forever and ever, and gave birth without pain, and all of these various things that had accreted around the story of Jesus' birth in the meantime. So,
and by the way, in case you overlooked the detail, Mary put it there, but in case you didn't compute in your head, difference between when she left the temple and when she becomes pregnant is at least 4 years.
At least 4. Right? Yes.
So you can't even say that she was pregnated at 12. You'd have to say 16.
16. And this is the earliest source, and the only source that is all early. The only one that is early says that she was 16 when she became pregnant and 16 to 17 when she gives birth.
Mm-hmm. So the 12, if even in like the most ridiculous, generous assumptions possible, the 12 is equivalent to the 6 of Aisha. Mm-hmm. And the 9 is equivalent not to 12, but 16. You tell me there's no difference between a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old? Come on, people.
Yeah. Snoopy, it's very weird. It's very weird. It's very ridiculous. So, now a very stupid person, as I mentioned, might claim that this is authentic. Now, so what's being at minimum half a century late to be scripture? being a stupid story that is overly contrived in every detail, ahistorically, and also transparently written to silence Jewish slander to a Muslim. They take much of their Quran from inauthentic sources, so why not insist that that something stupid is authentic like this? But what does this do? This establishes that these anxious people did not expect a girl to start menstruating before the age of 12, and Aisha was 9. These ancient people believed that an old man would be humiliated if people thought that old men would be humiliated if people thought that they were having sex with a girl who was legally old enough to get married, as Aisha wasn't, and Muhammad is 53 in the sources. So even with an older girl, an old man would be humiliated to if people thought that they were having intercourse. These ancient people gave 16 as the age at which Mary became pregnant, though still a virgin, as they believed that that was very young but a generally acceptable age. So that's kind of like your minimum normative age was 16 to these folks. Muhammad had already been having sex with Aisha when she first reached the age of menstruation at around the age of 15. Every bit of this condemns Muhammad as the socially outrageous pervert that he was to ancient people. He is outrageous not to modern people, to ancient people. He is outrageous, disgusting, ridiculous. There are other there are three other even later writings that Muslims like to mine for selected dates that we will also cover. So, Gospel of the Birth of Mary is 300 to 600 AD. So it might have been written after Muhammad was born. But whatever's authentic is whatever you want, right? It's later than the other source it's textually dependent on for some details. You cannot claim that this source is authentic for this reason because James would have to be then authentic because it takes details from it and they conflict, which discredits this version. It's like the Islamic dilemma in a nutshell. The later thing is dependent on the earlier thing and thus at least implicitly confirms it. And if
And by the
the
way,
and because
uh,
it conflicts, the later one has to be an authentic period. Yes?
and by the way, the Quran does seem to be aware of the protoevangelion. I think it's the story of
Yeah.
Zacharias seems to derive from that text.
It
So
yep.
the
And
Quran
Mary,
thinks it's inspired, the Quran thinks it's true, but Muslims should know better.
yeah, and Mary also under being discovered to be pregnant, undergoing some sort of proof of miraculous intervention is also from there. So yeah, Muslims do think that this first one, as stupid as it is authentic. But this one can't be because it conflicts with the first one and depends on. So it names Issachar, which is also wrong, as a high priest. It has a spurious event where he spurns Joachim as being cursed for not having any offspring, which is supposed to be according to Jewish law. It isn't, as far as I can know. I did find another source that said that there was a verse that said that those who do not have children are cursed. And I could not find and in a totally unrelated text. And I cannot find what they're talking about for the life of me. And I can't find any reference to it. Have no idea where the supposed verse is or in what text it's in. Maybe it's in part of the Apocrypha that I don't know well, but I cannot find it. But
I mean, it certainly could be in a lost text, right?
no,
The
no,
fact
it
that,
was written by the other one citing a verse that supposedly establishes this is a
right, right,
Christian
right. But
writer.
I'm saying it could be lost in a lost apocryphal text.
Oh, a lost apocryphal. Well, it'd have to be an apocryphal text that lots of people thought were standard. Maybe they're referring to rabbinical law and wrote something that makes it got it translated as verse, but that's not actually in the original. That's also possible. Because there is kind of this whole you're bad if you don't have kids in Talmudic sources. So I don't know where this source is. If you guys can find it for me, I'd appreciate it.
I mean,
This
it very well just might be folklore, right? Because I mean, even today, you'll find people say X idea is in the Bible when it's not
when
in the
it's not.
Bible.
Yeah, it's like cleanliness is next to godliness, and a lot of people think that. But this should have been somebody who should have known. I actually asked you about a while ago. I'm like, can you find this? And you were just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
but Let's see if I can
I
see.
think so. There are several possibilities. It could be a very bad, based on a very bad translation of a verse. It could be someone's commentary on the verse that someone confused for a verse.
Yeah,
It
I
could just
don't.
be pure urban legend. I mean, all kinds of
Yeah,
possibilities.
I
But
was super confused by that. So, um, I and I forgot who it was who said the other one. Now I put in something like, "Can you find this anywhere?" And you didn't find it. So, I have no idea what they're talking about. It's out there somewhere. It's floating around somewhere.
everyone,
But
bookmark this portion of the video. This will probably never happen again. Mary just
Mary
said
got
she can't figure
stumped.
something
I
out.
cannot find it. And I spent quite a while. I spent a couple hours, and then I just like threw up my hands. I'm like, I have no idea where this is coming from. Anyway, the angel comes and promises him a child and appears to Anna, does the same. Anna then goes to Jerusalem to meet her husband because she's not in Jerusalem. They worship together, and then she has Mary. Then at 3, she's left at the temple to be educated, this time with other virgins, because apparently there's a whole school of little girls there. Then, when she turns 14, the high priest announced that all the girls of that age should go home to get married according to the custom of the nation. And this seems to be trying to attribute later rabbinic ideals onto this first century and then turn it into a law. This one throws out menstruation as not being allowed in the temple as a reason. But then here's what the text says: Mary alone, virgin of the Lord, answered that she could not do this, saying that both her parents had devoted her to the service of the Lord, and that moreover she herself had made to the Lord a vow of virginity, which she would never violate by any intercourse with any man. This time, the men are all of the house and the family of the David that were unmarried and fit for marriage within the men that were chosen from, and the rod is to sprout a flower. So this has less of an emphasis on proving that she's a virgin. They're just assuming that she's going to be. So they don't insist that all the men be elderly. They're all unmarried and fit for marriage. Joseph is still really old. It doesn't give any more details about his background than the fact that he's a widower and old. After the marriage, Mary is assigned 7 virgin attendants of her same age, even though they're supposed to be married according to a couple of paragraphs before. Why does she have 7 14-year-old virgins with her when they're all supposed to get married? And this is something that happens in these legends and fairy tales all the time. You just run into this constantly. This is one of the ways that you know that this is just like made up as they went along, because you find these sorts of things like conflicts in the Quran that you find all the time. So Joseph leaves her and the other girls together as things at Bethlehem while she goes to her parents' house in Galilee. She's discovered to be pregnant just 4 months after their marriage, and then the angels reassure him that she is chaste, and then the text is over. So she could have borne the child at 13 or excuse me, at 14 or 15 in this one. But again, she's perfectly chaste, and it has to do with a rabbinic law that, or the custom of the nation, that's attributed to Jews and has nothing to do with Christian traditions or anything else. That she would get married then, and they're just assuming that people will get pregnant because they were all getting married then, because they probably have some funny ideas from what they know of these medieval Jewish ideals, which weren't actually followed. So it's an attempt to make this probably, they think that this is a more authentic Jewish story than the previous one, which is so clearly absurd. It seems a little bit more authentic, but a lot of the other details aren't there. So
Yeah, at least the author had sense enough not to make Zechariah the high priest. So he needs something at least. So Timothy threw out a couple suggestions here as to where that idea could have derived from. Maybe the story of Hannah weeping in the
oh yeah,
temple before she has Samuel, of course, or also in Leviticus, if a man and woman are found fornicating, they're to be stoned. But then the text also says childless. So obviously, if they're stoned to death, they're childless. But the text emphasizes that, which could give you the idea that being childless is itself a curse.
oh yeah, that might be it, because there's one that if you're found to be guilty, then you'll be childless forever after, or something like that. So maybe that's reading into it that the only reason that nobody knew about infertility then, that might be misunderstanding that, thinking that nobody was infertile, even though plenty of people were infertile in the Bible, like literally the two children of Naomi was. Even Rebecca was for years. Sarah was for years. Like the beloved, the most beloved wife of Israel, of Jacob, was of course the one who only had two children in her entire life, which is not fully sterile, but is fertility problems. Very common then. Hannah, of course, too. And these were the ones who received intercessions of miracles of ordinary people wouldn't have. So here is another one, which is only known in the West. So it wouldn't even be available to the East. And it's from the late 1500s to the early, or 500s to the early 600s. So this is during Muhammad's lifetime. So clearly an authentic ancient scripture source here from the age of Muhammad. So
You see, it was copying from the Quran.
yeah. So note that only a total idiot would think that this is real, that this is an authentic source. So it has the same start as Proto-Evangelion of James. I didn't want to type Proto-Evangelion 50 times. Don't mind saying it. I get tired typing it. But it's told from the point of view of Jesus. So this one is, the whole point of this one is to fill in more details about Joseph in this legendary style and material. And so it basically retells most of James, the Proto-Evangelion of James, but the point of view is now shifted to Jesus talking about his father. So it's really emphasizing Joseph and his background. This time there's no virgin school and there's no angel feeding her. But at age 12, lots are cast, this time just among 12 men of the tribe of Judah. And Joseph is selected through his name being drawn. So 12 men of Judah are like forced to come in, and those out of those 12, Joseph is chosen. This time she is exactly 14 when she becomes pregnant, which draws on the tradition of the gospel of the birth of Mary before, so it's combining the two. Joseph is reassured in a dream that she is chaste, and Mary again bears Jesus in a cave in the 15th year of her age, that is, before turning 15. The woman whose hand was shriveled in the earlier account becomes a bonus traveler when they flee to Egypt. She's just listed as going along with them. I guess this is to try to authenticate it by drawing from details of that previous one. This is a source for Joseph being 100 years old when he married Mary, and then 112 when he died, which would be when Jesus was not yet 10, contradicting the scripture if the boy, excuse me, of the boy Jesus in the temple at 12. So the person who wrote this is bad at math because I believe he forgot to count the 2 years. Oh, wait, that's a different one. Oh, this is actually correct. This one is 13. There's pseudo Matthew where it gets messed up, but it doesn't have an age. So, it forgot to count her pregnancy. So he should have been a bit older because he needs to be 12, and then you need one more year. Oh yeah, that is all messed up. So it's still a bit wonky, and the ages don't line up because they don't account for her gestation and they don't account for Jesus not being exactly on his 12th birthday. So when Muslims cite ages and they don't lie directly, they will only cite ages in this extremely late work, which is textually dependent on two works that conflict with it. And this makes them as dumb and clumsy as a law. Why? Because it has the earliest age of birth and one of the earliest age. Oh wait, no, this one does have 12. That's right. So this one had her married at 14, have the baby at 14 to 15. This one had her married at 12, have the baby at 14, drawing from both. This one has the earliest age of marriage and the earliest age of having the baby. So this is the favorite one that Muslims like to go to, saying that she was 12 at marriage, had the baby at 14, if they just don't lie and say that she had the baby at 12 because they're just totally lying. So this is the one that
I mean, in fairness, Mary, lying would require knowledge, and Muslims saying this has no idea where it came from. You say this is their favorite to go to, but they have no idea where the number came from. Let's be honest. Someone told them the number, and they're repeating it. Probably a large percentage of Muslims who say that actually think it's in the Bible.
Yeah, the woman whose hand is shriveled, she is the only other person of the midwife. The first midwife isn't named in the Proto-Evangelion of James. The other woman is named, and then she just like gets added on to the trip in this one. So she just comes along and serves them or something there. So he's supposed to be 100 years old when they married, but then 111 when he died, but he had to be with boy Jesus when he was at the temple at 12. So you need 12 plus the 2 years she was with him at least. So 113, 114, that sort of thing. It's just the ages don't line up because you're just guessing and you're not paying attention. And this is also something that's very typical of forgeries at this time. They don't actually try to get the details correct. It's not that this was a particularly sloppy forger, that's just how forgeries worked. They don't expect any of their details to be researched. They feel free to just make up stuff and just assume that it won't be looked up. You don't have clever forgeries in this period of history. You don't start getting clever forgeries until like the 1400s or 1500s. They're really quite clumsy before then. When the first forgeries are like publicly denounced and really kind of get the beat down on them, kind of in the later Middle Ages, people like go out of their way to denounce forgeries, other than the early attempts at shoving things in the gospel. Those were all shoved out and denounced immediately. But other stuff, people just let the folklore crew and didn't really care much one way or another until they went, wait, we need to make sure that we're only, yeah, we have our scripture and that's intact, but our tradition needs to be accurate as well. And then they started paying more attention to identifying forgeries, and thus people who did forgeries tried harder. So that's what
I will suggest that some of these works are written for clear theological purposes, even to contradict Christian theology, and they have a clear motive. But I would suggest in cases where it's basically in line with what Christians already believe, the reason they were so sloppy is because they're not actually trying to write history, right? They're just
yeah,
writing a fantasy story to entertain, and they expect their audience to understand that it's a fantasy story and not supposed to be history.
yeah. I,
So
I suspect that the history of Joseph the Carpenter is more of a legendary sort of thing. Like
yeah,
I
right.
think
So like
that is
it's a
less
fanciful
serious than some
tale
of it.
that the audience, there's no fraud, right? It's not a forgery, because the audience and the author both understand that it's a fanciful version of what might have happened, but probably not.
Yeah,
Just like we do today, right? We tell stories about the past, and people understand that a story, while maybe having some loose historical details, isn't really anything real. It's just a fantasy story or a fictional story set in the past. And I think that probably in many cases, that's the way the audience would have seen these texts.
yeah,
Now,
kind
it's
of
not the
like
way Muhammad
stories.
sees them when he
Yeah,
encounters them, but
yep,
I
yeah. I
wanted to
think
say
the
that the
first one,
author wasn't trying to deceive.
the first one absolutely was trying to trick
Well,
people, or at
yeah,
least
yeah, yeah.
that one was totally
And it's
trying
much
to.
more careful, right?
Yeah, well, he tried to be. He misunderstood things, but he was working hard at getting things right, and he had a good knowledge of the Bible for a person at the time, but probably didn't have a physical copy of the Bible that he could look stuff up in and was going from memory. That's what it seems like.
Oh yeah,
So,
I'm sure that's probably the case of all of these, and that they don't have the text in front of them. The text is available. People know it. I'm not suggesting it was lost or people didn't understand the text, but they wouldn't have it while they're writing the story, and they would have to go based on memory. And despite the Hadith science, we all know that memory is not completely reliable, and you confuse details, and that's probably what happened.
yeah, and then this one was strictly Western, and it was written in 650 or later, and it mostly copies the Proto-Evangelion of James with extra embroideries. It also incorporates the Gospel of the Birth of Mary details in there too. In some instances, here we have an incredible toddler, so I'm going to read that one paragraph because it's hilarious. We also have a lot more emphasis on chastity as a general virtue, engaging with a rabbinical insistence on procreation and refuting them with Christian ideals of chastity. So this is seen as rabbinical procreation versus Christian chastity, head to head, and Christian chastity coming up on top. So um, here is the actual paragraph that's hilarious that I think everybody should hear. And Mary was held in admiration by all the people of Israel. And when she was 3 years old, so before that she was admired, but now she's 3, she walked with a step so mature, she spoke so perfectly, and spent her time so assiduously in the praises of God that all were astonished at her and wondered. And she was not reckoned a young infant, but as it were a grown up person of 30 years old. So now we have a grown up 3-year old, by the way. She was so constant in prayer, and her appearance was so beautiful and glorious that scarcely anyone could look at her face. And she occupied herself constantly with her wool work, so that she and her tender years could do all that old women were not able to do. And this was the order that she had set for herself. From the morning to the third hour she remained in prayer. From the third to the ninth she was occupied with her weaving, and from the ninth she again applied herself in prayer. She did not retire from praying until there appeared to her the angel of the Lord, from whose hand she is to receive food, and thus did she become more and more perfect in the work of God. Then when the older virgins rested from the praises of God, she did not rest at all, so that in the praises and vigils of God none were found before her, none more learned in the wisdom of the law of God, more lowly in humility, more elegant in singing, more perfect in all virtue. She refreshed herself only with the food which she daily received from the hand of the angel, uh, but the food which she obtained from the priests she divided among the poor. The angels of God were often seen speaking with her, and they most diligently obeyed her. If anyone who was unwell touched her, the same hour he went home cured. So, obviously, fantasy. Then Abiathar the priest offered gifts without end to the high priest in order that he might obtain her as a wife to his son. And that's supposed to be a high priest, even though he's not a high priest at that time, I think. Uh, well, there are multiple high priests here, so they're kind of losing track of the plot. That's okay. Mary forbade them, saying, "It cannot be that I should know a man, or that a man should know me." For all the priests and her relations kept saying to her, "God is worshipped in children and adored in posterity, as has always happened among the sons of Israel." So here's the point. Jewish versus Christian virtue. But Mary answered and said to them, "God is worshipped in chastity, and is proved first of all. For before Abel there was none righteous among men, and he by his offerings pleased God, and was without mercy slain by him who displeased him. 2 crowns therefore he received, one of oblation and of virginity, because in his flesh there was no pollution." So this is a very reaching, that really sounds high medieval, frankly, in its content. So I would actually suspect that it might even be a bit older than this. So her age at marriage is increased to 14 here, which is the same as the gospel of the birth of Mary. So we're going to that 14. Now it came to pass when she was 14 years old, and on this account there was an occasion for the Pharisees, saying that it was now a custom that no woman of that age should abide in the temple of God. They fell upon the plan of sending a herald through all the tribes of Israel, that on the third day they should come together to the temple of the Lord. Joseph is even older here than the original James. "I am an old man, I have children. Why do you hand over to me this infant who is younger than my grandson?" So that's a new bit here. Threatening to agreeing, he says this: "I indeed do not despise the will of God, but I shall be her guardian until I can ascertain concerning the will of God, as to which of my sons can have her as his wife. Let some virgins of her companions, with whom she may meanwhile spend her time, be given as a consolation to her." So we're fixing the whole, why are there virgins older than her same age if they're all supposed to be married? He's fixing that part from the previous story. Abiathar, the high priest, see, he is a high priest here. I don't know why he's a high priest. Everybody's a high priest. Answered and said, "5 virgins indeed shall be given to her for consolation until the appointed day come in which you may receive her, for to no other can she be joined in marriage." So now she gets the attendance from the last one, the tale of Joseph the carpenter. Then the law is cast for making the veil, though it's no longer virginity test, and it goes to her, who is the youngest of the virgins. So where are these other virgins living if everybody's supposed to be if everybody's supposed to be married by now, but whatever. Joseph leaves for 9 months. When he comes back, she's visibly pregnant. This time, the virgin's vouch for her purity, and she is still being fed by angels, which is a cool trick for saving money on food. They are again tested with the drinking water, but the writer doesn't realize it has any relation to the ordeal of bitter waters in the Old Testament anymore. So now it just makes your face change if you walk around the altar 7 times. I just don't know. Once again, they go to Bethlehem. She bears Christ in a cave, this time with an angelic audience. Not fun. I do not recommend any audience. Thank you. Both women are now midwives, but they're useless and don't help in the birth and instead only examine her to testify that she is still a virgin and even gave birth with no blood. She is therefore at least, because apparently we don't have placentas anymore. She is therefore at least a minimum of 15 when she gives birth.
Hey,
Given
if
that
it's a
she's
miracle, it's a
visibly
miracle,
pregnant,
Mary. Anything
yeah,
can happen if it's a miracle.
given that she is visibly pregnant at an age of no less than 14 years and 9 months, but doesn't give birth for some additional time, her real age is probably meant to be 16, like in the original it copied from. So it's probably reverting to 16, even though the minimum is 15. So here are all the sources. And you notice how Muslims pick and choose, but all of them condemn Muhammad. So I did want to go through each of these sources because this is the exhaustive list of
That's not true, Mary.
things that are supposed to give histories of Mary, basically.
You
So
forgot the ultimate source that the Muslims actually quote, that
the
being the
Quran.
Catholic. Well, I was going to say the Catholic
Oh,
Encyclopedia.
but the Catholic Encyclopedia just like literally
It
cites
literally
these.
says, according to unreliable texts of no historical value whatsoever, Mary was 12. And then they say, you see, the Catholic Encyclopedia says Mary was 12. We left off the previous sentence and half of
Yeah.
this sentence, but if you only read some of the words like we always do with the Bible anyway, then it says exactly what we want it to say.
Yeah. Abiathar wasn't one of them, and this last one, the pseudo Matthew, has like a whole teeming group of priests. So we have one high priest talking to a bunch of other high priests, so offering gifts to a bunch of high priests. So a pseudo Matthew has no idea what a high priest even is. So
Yes, there was a question earlier, which I think I forgot to bookmark, but I'll just say it was like, why would someone forge a gospel in the same name as an existing gospel? And I just wanted to clarify that actually pseudo Matthew, very uncertain what the intended title of the work is. It's only known from fragments, and it came to bear that name, but it also bears other names. So it may not even be claiming that Matthew is the author. That's just its conventional title in modern times. So don't know exactly how it came to bear that title, but the person who wrote it might not have been claiming to be Matthew.
I want our buddy Nur Ani to answer the question: is Allah so stupid that he doesn't know that girls getting pregnant too young is super dangerous? Or is he so evil that he doesn't care and thinks that women ought to die so that men's penises can be happier, because the best kind of sex is sex with a tiny girl, and that needs to happen. So when she comes back, that is a question she needs to answer. Is Allah too stupid to know that early childbirth is dangerous to women, or is he too evil to care? Now, our buddy, uh, Mananaz, I just messed up his name again. Anyway, he says that Allah is evil. Do you think he's stupid or evil? So we have one vote for evil from a Muslim already. What is the vote for the other Muslim? And do you think that you should die trying to bear a child who cannot fit through your pelvis to make a man's penis happier, because it's more fun to have sex with you when you are so small that you can't give birth without danger?
So Nerd Never is on topic anymore. She doesn't even try. She used to at least try. Now she just comes in spamming random stuff, which leads to instant timeout. But she's already come back from timeout once, so I'm sure she'll come back another time and answer Mary's question. All right. I think we're probably nearing the end. of the presentation?
Oh yeah, we're done. We're totally done.
Oh,
So.
excellent, excellent. Well, you put up another slide, so I wasn't sure
Oh
if
no,
this
I
was the
was just
last one.
going back to that one for the benefit of our Muslim who came and judged
No, I
us.
think that that should be the last, actually.
Yep.
That should be the question here, because it seems that despite Muslims telling this was culturally normal, which wouldn't justify it anyway, even if it was culturally normal. As it
Ha!
pointed out, drinking alcohol has been normal in every culture in human history, basically. And yet you say that's wrong. So just being normal wouldn't be sufficient. But in reality, Mary could only find one society in human history where there was any comparison to Islamic teachings on marriage. Weird stuff, indeed. Now,
And
there
by
were
the way,
societies, right? There were some societies that practiced somewhat younger marriage, but never in any society in the history of the world has it been normal for a 50-year-old to marry a 9 or 6-year-old and better at age 9. That has never, ever been normal. Seems that the vast majority of all the data Mary looked at across many cultures, including non Christian cultures, including long ago, including recently, vast amount of time, vast amount of different religions and cultures, and seems that just about all of them, it was normal for girls to get married somewhere between late teens and early 20s, and for guys to be ever so slightly older, say early 20s to late 20s. That now, obviously, any particular marriage might be different, but that would be the norm. That would be what the majority of people did. The only exception to that, I guess, would be literally right now, right where it has become normal to be married somewhat later than that for the most part. Every other society through human history seems to prefer this pattern of late teens, early 20s for girls, and approximately 3 years later on average for guys, which would suggest that the if we're saying that this is driven by evolution, that is the evolutionary preference. That is the natural inclination of people. And actually, the data backs that based on the rate of female deaths during childbirth that Mary looked at, that would be the ideal time for a female to have her first child, would be in that general range, not start having sex with them before they even menstruate so that you can impregnate them as soon as possible. That would not be the way to maximize children. That would not be what evolution would drive. It would, in fact, be, well,
I mean, well,
what
it
the
would
Christian
maximize the
normative
number of
marriage is.
births. It does maximize the number of births by about a quarter of a child in most data sets. A quarter of a child to half a child by, but so many more children die because
Right.
of because well,
So,
and it's not just that they die. It's not just that they die at the moment that the girl is young, but she is a worse mother for the rest of her life. A girl who has had her first child under the age of 15 is more likely to have a child die when she gives birth at 20, 25, 30, 35 because she is a worse mother. And it is, you're just a little bit slow to pick up the baby. You're just a little bit slow to react. Why? Because you've been damaged yourself by giving birth so young. And
right. You're
you're
so-called
messed up.
quote unquote forced to grow up, right? In other words, you don't actually finish developing mentally fully because you're forced to, not like, I should clarify what I mean by forced. Because of the circumstances, your brain chemistry changes in such a way that it arrests development. It stops development. You don't develop any further, and you're left in that state. Which, by the way, is one of the possible consequences. By far, not the only possible consequence, because there are many physical and emotional and mental consequences. But one of the possible consequences of raping a child is that you will cause that person never to fully develop, and they'll be stuck in this somewhat childlike state, in a very confused state for the rest of their life. Does that happen 100% of the time? No. Does, if we assume that the Islamic texts paint an accurate picture of Aisha and she was a normal adult, well, normal other than dying at a fairly young age, uh, does that mean that she wasn't abused? No, it's not a guarantee. It's just a possibility. Uh, but that's one of the possible consequences. And to finish the evolutionary argument, I will take the data for granted that you might have a quarter more child, but that's not what evolutionary prefers, right? From a pure
It's
biological
they
standpoint,
survive,
right?
which
You
they
have
don't.
one
And
from a pure biological standpoint, an atheistic standpoint, you have one and one purpose only, and that's to propagate your DNA. You don't propagate your DNA by having the maximum number of children. You have the propagate your DNA by having the maximum number of children who themselves have children, which means they
right.
have to grow to adulthood and maximize the number of children that they themselves have, which means that it is evolutionary preferable to marry at the age that our modern society has artificially imposed upon us. Weird,
So
weird, weird, weird. Now, I'm not
there is
saying that that's how we should decide morals, but that was half of Daniel's argument was that even
is
evolution
evolution.
tells us,
Yes,
right?
evolution tells us. So your pious Muslim says that evolution says you should be a perv, and here are these Marxists, a Marxist and a Freudian, who says that you ought to have sex with people as soon as they become pubescent, even though Muhammad did it 6 years before Aisha became pubescent. But as soon as they are able to conceive, you ought to maximize the number of kids that you have and maximize your spread. And all the data says otherwise. Because again, it's so hard to find information because people stop having kids for other reasons than just because that they are unable to have kids and everything else. So the data is not really fair one way or another. It's really hard to get good data. But the Peruvian highland data seems to be the least biased data, where lots of other social factors don't really factor in as much. And Jack Ray is wondering, what do I mean by women just responding a little bit more slowly, or girls? Literally, when you have a baby who is so incredibly fragile, and the only source of food that this baby has is breastfeeding, if you are lax to respond to the baby's cries, you do not feed the baby enough, maybe you just roll over one time per night and go to sleep rather than feed the baby when the baby cries, and just go, no, I'm not doing it. The baby can cry. The chances of that baby making it are considerably reduced. A lot of the data in Africa shows that if the girls can give birth in a hospital, then they are not terrible because they have C-sections, they have forceps. If they give birth in a hospital, you still have a much higher rate of neonatal death, and it's related to neglect of these girls, of these children, because they're not they basically have PTSD from birth rather than being in any kind of place where they are in a mothering sort of situation. Now, it is true. Now, if you look at, it's really interesting. If you look at societies in which there are hunter gatherers, what you see is that over and over again, girls of about 12 years old have a social role in the tribe of being kind of little helper mothers helpers, that is their role in society. So they do take charge of babies, but they do these for limited amounts of time. They're not their own offspring, they're the primary caregiver. They hold a sibling or a cousin or a nephew or a niece, that they have this little role where they are developing maternal skills as they are going through puberty and growing up, so that they begin having kids at 16, 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there, even among these hunter gatherers, because you have the role of little mother for a while, little helper, who is learning the maternal role and learning to be responsive and learning to take care, rather than being thrust in the situation of being the sole caregiver. So, and there's some sociological things that show that kids like fight like cats and dogs a lot of times with other siblings between 8 and 12. But if you give them tasks related to younger siblings to distract them, they get along much better. So there are real developmental roles for kids, because otherwise they're fighting with them because they kind of want to be bossy but they really can and they don't have that role. So you just give them enough, but you don't overburden them with things that are age inappropriate. This is part of growing up, is doing those little things, not being entirely responsible, but having these little pieces of responsibility that increase slightly and increase slightly and increase slightly, and then eventually you're ready to be a mother. But it's not, oh, she's menstruating, she should give birth and she's going to be a perfectly good mother. And yes, Aisha was learning that with her dolls. And that is an age appropriate thing. You do role play with the dolls and you play adult roles. And it's kind of, it's you find a lot of feminists, oh, boys should play with dolls and girls should not, kind of thing, like wanting to strip away roles and not let it be. But no, that's part of the role play, is part of growing up to have that capacity. It really is part of it. But here she was with a man climbing on top of her when she was only at the stage where she is playing with a little doll, not even taking that role with an actual baby belonging to someone else.
So we do have Islam Ultimate Truth in the chat who's asking if he can join. I'm going to make him prove that he at least has something on topic to respond to. I'm not going to allow him just to give the Dawa script. He needs to engage with the material, so he needs to prove that he claims he watched part of it. Part is sufficient, right? I don't care if you've watched every minute, but you need to respond to something specific in the presentation, not just come up here and be like, it was normal to marry children based
Because
on,
I've already shown it's not.
yeah, based on nothing.
But what I'd like him to respond to is Allah too stupid to know that early childbirth is dangerous for women, or is he too evil to care?
Nope,
That
let's
is
put
the
that back
answer
up
that
here.
I want from all the Muslims. So that is the answer that I want to have answered. So
let me just summarize here. So for Islam Ultimate Truth, or anyone else who hasn't seen the whole presentation, the data, hard data, shows that human females, again, I'm using a neutral term on purpose, human females who get pregnant at a very young age, and thus obviously are menstruating, are obviously in the puberty process, at least, are far more likely by an order of magnitude to die during childbirth than people who wait, or females who wait till 18 or so. The 18 is not a magical number. I'm just saying that late teens to early 20s seems to be the ideal window to have your first child according to the data. So Allah, presumably, if he's all knowing, would know this about human biology and would create laws and rules around that fact. That gives two possibilities. Either he doesn't know that because he's stupid, or he does know that and he creates laws that are about male pleasure and not about female safety, and thus is evil. There is no other possibility according to the data.
so
And he
you have
proves,
clearly,
right? I asked him to give one
you
point
haven't
from the
watched.
talk that he wanted to respond to. He says it's a cultural thing, also many evidences from other cultures. In other words, he didn't watch anything. He just came in here and thought he could give a talking point. You need some data. We deal with data here, not with fantasies. Mary cited tons of data. I understand you didn't actually watch the presentation, and you were technically not lying when you said part of it, because you probably watched the last 30 seconds or something along those lines. Here's what you need to do if you want to actually respond to this. Actually refute it in a way that actually means refuting, not just speaking words. You need to watch it back, look at the data, and find data that paints a different picture. That is how you actually refute an argument, is providing data that paints a different picture than what the person with the making the argument said. Maybe they left data out. Maybe they misinterpreted it. Maybe they misrepresented it. Those are all possibilities, but you actually have to show that, not just assert it, and certainly not just assert it's a cultural thing. There is evidence of this. That is not
And
an argument.
and here's the thing. I have shown how every literate culture who had an ability to express whether or not it was dangerous knew that it was bad for women and children, for females who are capable of giving birth, to give birth young. It is bad for them. Everyone knew that. Okay? Everyone knew it was bad for them. You can't say that it's fine because it's a cultural thing. This is a
And,
law. This is not a culture. This is not a
and again,
culture. So
I'm gonna
do you
put this
have
in Islamic terms.
data and evidence? I gave
Right.
data and evidence that people knew that early marriage was bad for women and children and that it is now. So do you have data and evidence that says otherwise? Do you have data and evidence that shows that it is good for girls who are not fully developed to have children and that it is not more dangerous for them than when they're around 20? So that is the question. The question is not like, do other cultures who don't have standards from Allah do this?
And exactly, I got to put this in Islamic terms again. This is a perfect example. Maybe Houston already knew it or already thought of it. I mean, sure, he certainly knew it, but maybe he already thought of it, or maybe he's just repeating what I said earlier. But every culture, with maybe like a fraction of a percent exceptions in human history, like literally the first known writing is a recipe for alcohol. Every human culture has drank alcohol and found it to be a generally good thing, culturally speaking. Now, there were many people, medically minded people, right? Maybe they don't have all the benefits of modern medicine, but they do have eyes and they can observe things, who said that drinking alcohol to excess was damaging to human health. The Bible itself also says that. It says that drinking to excess is sinful. However, by your argument, since every culture has practiced drinking alcohol and found it to be socially acceptable and good, it doesn't matter what the physical reality is. It doesn't matter if alcohol causes various social problems, causes various medical problems, causes uh, early death. None of that matters because all that matters is that it was culturally normative and therefore it should be allowed. And yet, Allah doesn't allow it. Got some double standards there, buddy? Got some double standards? And he says that he has data and can prove it.
So
Yeah,
the,
give us one data point in the chat. I'm not letting you up here
until
until
you
you
have
prove.
an actual data point that proves that childbirth isn't dangerous for women. Early childbirth isn't dangerous for women, isn't more dangerous for women than childbirth slightly later, and does not kill women.
Yeah, because a lot of people in the audience have encouraged me not to talk to you. I don't know if you're actually the same guy as Ultimate Truth. You might be just have a coincidental name. But if you are actually Ultimate Truth, that's why they're saying that they don't think I should talk to you. I'm going to give you a chance, right? Whether you're the Ultimate Truth or someone else who also has that in their name, give me one data point, just one, right? You can bring up more when you come up, but give me one data point that contradicts anything said in this presentation. Then we'll have something to talk about. Until then, I know you're just going to say it was normal. What's your problem? Blah, blah, blah.
Which I have already shown that it's not true that it was normal across
Yep.
cultures, that it was absolutely not normal across cultures. I gave multiple pieces of objective evidence that it was very unusual, that it was incredibly unusual to have intercourse with a female before she menstruated, and to have no period of maidenhood that was considered to be socially ingrained was also quite unusual in most. So you need to bring me evidence that Allah somehow knows that early marriage isn't bad for women and children, contrary to all actual real evidence, or that killing women is somehow not evil. I don't know.
I have a Hindu scripture which says Hindu scriptures have names, they have reference systems, and they certainly have words. So give me a quote, give me a reference, give me something. Yeah, the mere fact you're calling it Hindu scripture indicates you have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because that's not a term that a Hindu would actually
And
use.
again, saying that some other culture allowed something evil to happen doesn't keep Allah from being evil or stupid. Like all of the cultures that knew that it's bad to have girls have kids before about age 18. They were perfectly aware that, around about 18 is sort of the beginning of the ideal window. And almost every culture, they figured out one way or another. But a certain percentage of the girls were married and had kids before then. But they knew that it was bad. Now, this is supposed to be from your God about the ideal. According to Muhammad, the absolute ideal is what? Let's find that. Let's find the absolute ideal. It won't take very long. It is, here we go. The absolute ideal, according to Muhammad, is a little girl who is so young that she is not able to look after children, who would also be, she'd be the same age as little girls who are typically at home, should not be able to look after other little children. She would not be able to teach children manners or even comb children's hair or serve them, which probably means dress and feed them. That she isn't going to be able to do all the activities of a woman, and that is the ideal age for marriage and intercourse because it's enjoyable.
Which I do want to be fair here, right? I do want to be fair that the vast majority of Muslim men would find this disgusting and wouldn't actually do it. They can't say they find it disgusting, or well, they might say I personally don't like it or something like that, but they can't say it's wrong.
Right.
But it's allowed in Islam. So do most Muslims practice pedophilia or child marriage or whatever? No, because most men would not find this pleasurable, and thus they wouldn't do it because it wouldn't maximize their pleasure. But if they did have such inclinations, then they would absolutely do it because there's nothing wrong with it in Islam.
And they should think that it is the sexual ideal, that that is the best kind, if you don't have another reason, to marry someone else. If it is for sexual pleasure, according to Muhammad, that is the ideal.
So I'm not hearing anything other than Hindu scripture, which and they couldn't even tell me what that Hindu scripture supposedly says. So I think we'll wrap up here in a couple minutes. Got a couple more minutes for him to make some some objective claim that he has evidence. Do have a super chat from Storymaker 2.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
So the super chat, it says, good evening. This is slightly off topic, but what are your thoughts on the resurgence of Norse paganism? I see that Mary wants to answer this, but let me just say one quick thing first. I don't know something specific to Norse paganism, but the general push, yeah. That's why you get to answer second, because you'll have the better answer. But the general push, right, towards pagan ideas, towards traditional ideas, which aren't really any connection to the pagan past at all, is because when people abandon Christianity, they don't really want to embrace atheism because atheism doesn't really make any sense and it's not satisfying. And so then they look for anything to replace Christianity. When you stop believing in the Christian God, you don't just stop believing in God, but then you have a desire to find anything else to connect to, and thus people will try to connect to their ancestors and make up a bunch of nonsense in the process.
Oh, but it gets better. So, if you want to be a new age moronic hippie, you decide that you want to be a Celt and dress up as a druid, and for some inexplicable reason that no one can ever explain to me, they decide that druids wear white robes like Romans, like you're at a toga party, and then they dance around the Stonehenge, which had been abandoned for centuries by the time the Bretons came and has absolutely nothing to do with any Celtic culture whatsoever. So they go and steal that. It would be like being a Muslim, saying that, oh, I am an Arab dressing like a Persian and dancing around the pyramids and saying that that's a traditional Muslim activity to dress like a a, a, a Persian and dance around pyramids because this is ancient Egyptian religion, or at least this is true Arab religion rather. Like, so stupid. So stupid. But it's the people who want to believe that the druids, they're all about peace. They weren't about the writhing of enemies who are disemboweled to tell the future. No, they're about green things because I'm an idiot Victorian-esque Gnostic sort of idiot and I want, Wicca kind of stuff. So that's what that is. Now, as for Norse, they're 99% white supremacists who hate everyone else. If you see someone with a Norse tattoo, ask them what they think about Jews, ask them what they think about black people. They're going to be dirtbags almost always. It's just another marker for white supremacy.
Yeah, so the ignoring the white supremacist part, which I'm sure is probably true.
They don't
If
actually
you,
have. They
if,
aren't really
wait,
pagans, though. Just so you know.
right. Yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's fair, right? None of these neo-pagans have anything to do with the traditional pagan religions, right? They don't believe anything that their supposed ancestors believed. Uh, but as Mary said, if you want to be a hippie, peace-loving, whatever, you become a witch or a druid. And if you want to be violent, then you become a Norse pagan, right? You become a Viking.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So,
And I think
yeah,
truth, Islam, ultimate truth seems to have left the chat when asked for one thing that we could check. I wonder why.
his Dawa script didn't actually go that far. So, yep, he
Yeah,
ran
it didn't
away.
have any sources on it. You got to upgrade to the professional version that at least has the sources that they know no one will check. And then you can pretend that you have a source, and then we'll go to the source and show you don't actually have a source. But the
Yeah.
sophisticated Dawa scripts do have sources on them, so you need to get that more advanced version. All right, just a couple other comments I wanted to take before we wrapped up there. A very good point from Horror Fan. Even back then, it was not considered normal. So even in Arabia, and Mary's covered this for various ways in the past, even in the pre-Islamic Arabian culture, not even just cultures in general, but that one specifically, it was not normal. In Muhammad's culture, it was not normal. And he cites as evidence Sunan and Nasai 32:21, paraphrasing, obviously not quoting here, but Abu Bakr proposed to Fatima, Muhammad's daughter, and Muhammad denies him, saying she is too young as the reason why he can't get married to her. And she's older than 9, by the way. So it seems that even Muhammad knew that this was not normal. Sorry, we already had that. And then this comment from Protestant Believer: brains are not a requirement for being a Muslim. And this is not an offensive comment. If a Muslim takes offense at this, then they don't understand their own religion, because according to Islam, rocks are Muslims, trees are Muslims, stars are Muslims. Everything is a Muslim. Everything in creation is a Muslim. So this is just a simple factual statement. And I would suggest that brains are, in fact, a near anti-requirement to being a Muslim, meaning if you have one, it's virtually impossible to be a Muslim. You have to learn how to completely turn that brain off when it comes to anything in religion, which is not easy to do. And if you have any doubt whatsoever, because you're using even 1% of your brain, then you are a hypocrite, a not real Muslim, and you're condemned to hell by the Quran and the words of Muhammad. So most Muslims, most people who call themselves Muslims might have some brain, have some functioning brain, and realize there's some problems, but decide to ignore them. And they're not real Muslims according to the standard of Islam. All right, so I think that will do it, since our Muslim friend ran away as soon as he was given the opportunity to provide a source to prove that he was worth talking to. Such a shame. I was really looking forward to that conversation. I was not, however, looking forward to running through the Dawa script that we just refuted again,
Yep.
which is why I made him prove that he had something of value to add. If another Muslim watches this later and thinks you do have something of value to add, please do contact me. I would love to have a live conversation with someone who is the least bit thoughtful on these issues,
Oh,
because
let
you're in
me
a really,
share.
really bad situation, because you either try to claim that it's culturally normative, which it's not, and shouldn't be the standard of morality, or you have to argue that Allah overrode human culture because this is so superior to the way humans act, in contrast to the data that suggests that humans actually act in a logical way consistent with what is best for them. Weird.
Oh, let me quickly add this, because Hinduism, I didn't address the Hindu stuff because it's nonsensical and who cares what pagans do anyway? Like, seriously, who cares what pagans do? But let us look at what the Hindu sources that he really wanted to run to actually say. We'll start with, whoops, oh, dang it, dang it, dang it, dang it. I missed. Now you're going to have a peek ahead of time. There we go. So, talks about a person of 30 years should wed a girl of 10 years, or a person of 21 years should wed a girl of 7 years. Oh my goodness. So young. So very young. Isn't that terrible? And then, whoops, I'm cheating ahead. Another one says pretty much the same thing. If he must marry, he must select a maiden who is a third of his age, one who has not too much hair, but who is not without any, one who is not very black or yellow complexion, and who is not from birth a cripple or deformed. Okay, so that's the recommended for the grooms to choose their brides. Oh, a third of their age. Oh my goodness, so young. Ready for this? All right, this is from the Mahabharata, which everyone is probably familiar with. It's one of the big Hindu texts. At least you've seen the word before, right? I don't mean like you've
Everyone is
read it.
probably
You would have
familiar
read
with.
it.
Okay, if you mean
We're
familiar
like,
with the
yeah,
word,
familiar with the
sure.
word. You've heard the word before. It's a famous word. Ready? A person of 30 years old should wed a girl of 10 years of age, called one whose entire body can be covered with a single piece of cloth. Or a person of 1 and 20 years old should wed a girl of 7 years. That girl who has no brother nor father should not be wed, for she may be intended as putrika of her sire. I don't know what that means. Um, after, what is this? After the appearance of puberty, the girl, if not married, should wait for 3 years. On the fourth year, she should look for a husband herself without waiting any longer for kinsmen to select one for her. The offspring of such a girl do not lose their respectability, nor does a union with such a girl become disgraceful. If instead of selecting a husband for herself, she acts otherwise, she incurs the reproach of God Himself, etc., etc. So, notice that after the appearance of puberty, if she's not married, she should wait for 3 years, and then on the fourth year, she should look for a husband herself without waiting for a kinsman to select one for her. What is this implying here? That when she reaches the age of cohabitation, she should select one for herself and go and cohabit with him. Because this is about having a legal marriage contract before the age of puberty to have everything arranged properly and stuff. And then she would stay in her parental household until the age in which it is appropriate for her to start
So, in
cohabiting.
other words, right, it's equivalent to
A
Aisha
betrothal, a
06.
waiting period, and then cohabitation with a period of maidenhood in there. So on the fourth year, 3 years have completed after puberty, which normally gets you to Tanner 5. That's normally when Tanner 5 begins, when you're finished developing. And other people commented in here, yes, all of my grandparents and great grandparents, they say that, yeah, we conducted marriages at younger ages, but the girls did not cohabitate with their husbands until later.
So your 3 criteria were lust. So is this done for lust?
No, it's specifically so that it's arranged in purity before weird the dharma can accumulate, sort of thing. They think that arranging this ahead
Yeah,
of
so
time will help.
some religious purpose, right?
Yeah, it's a religious
But
purpose,
it has
but
nothing to
there's
do
no
with
lust.
lust.
Right.
No lust. So your second criteria was sex. Is sex involved in this marriage?
Not until she is 3 years after she begins to menstruate.
What was your third criteria? I think I
Uh,
said there was 3.
Example for mankind, and
Example for mankind.
this is an actual.
Okay, so that one actually applies because this is actually an advice, right? So it is actually applicable. But the first 2 failed, and you need all 3. So not analogous to Muhammad. And yes, Mary has upgraded to the premium Dawa script. She knew what the source that our friend didn't know was. And she knew that when you actually read it, you find out it is not what he thinks it is. He
Yeah.
assumes sex equals contract for marriage because that's what it is. Or sorry, marriage is contract for sex. I said that backwards. He thinks that's what it means in all cultures and all societies because that's what it means to him, but it is not what it means in the Hindu text. So there
Right,
you go.
right. So it meant marriage would be contractually completed. So it is a completed marriage at that point, but it's not completed with intercourse. That's why, but no one, the ideal is to have it done for you. But then if you reach the age of cohabitation, you have the right to contract it yourself. So there we go.
And yeah, this is exactly how it works, right? They intentionally are as vague as possible. Well, and the average DAI won't even know the details. But then when forced to give the details, they'll put out the source, right? That's why I call it the advanced Dawa script, because the average DAI won't even know the source, but some will. And then they'll give it to you, and they'll assume that you're not going to look it up and just take their quote at face value. And if you just take the few words they quote, it might indeed look bad, right?
Yeah.
Same thing they do with the Bible. It's the exact same principle they do with the Bible. Now, Christians usually don't follow for this because Christians usually at least have enough respect for the Bible to go and read the passage in context if they don't know it off the top of their head. But same idea, right? You take any source, you take whatever small amount of text you can that seems to tell a story that is aligned with what you want to say, and then you cite that as a source, even if the actual source, in the case of the Proto-Evangelion of James, or in the case of this Hindu text, actually says the exact opposite when you actually think about it in its literary context. It's telling you that this is abnormal, right? That Muhammad's marriage is abnormal, that Muhammad bedding a girl is abnormal, and they don't care, right?
Yeah.
I've seen this with so many texts, any text. It's not just Hindu scriptures or Christian scriptures, any text. If they give you a source, look it up. It doesn't matter if it is the dumbest Dawa guy, the lowest base level guy, someone like Ali Dawa, or if it's Shabir Ali. I guarantee you the quote is out of context and is not actually what the author of the text meant, let alone justification for what they claim.
So it's also now the one culture that is well known in the ancient world that had normalized, or at least idealized intercourse before puberty was our Sasanian Persians. The Zoroastrians thought that the ideal for contracting marriage was 9, and the ideal for consummating marriage is 12, which is still 3 years later than Muhammad. So the worst one that there was, which was meant to like capture the first ovulation basically and impregnate the girls as soon as possible, was 12, not Muhammad's 9. So,
and again, I've said this so many times, but there is a massive difference between a girl age 9 and a girl age 12, right? And the most extreme examples in world history you can find set 12 as the minimum age. I challenge you to find any other text that sets the minimum age for sex lower than 12. I don't think you'll find it, and yet this is normative in Islam. And we can probably all agree that 12 is actually too young, but it's still massively different than 9. The younger you are, the more you develop each year of your life. There's not that much difference between 30 and 33, but there's a huge difference between 6 and 9. There's a huge difference between 9 and 12. This is Islam, right? Everything is distorted. I have yet to find a single honest argument by any Muslim.
And by the way, I might be misreading that by puberty. It might mean signs of puberty, so then it might be considered like basically Tanner stage 4 rather than like for the around the time that menstruation usually starts, rather than 5, which is full adulthood. It depends on what they mean by puberty in that particular context. So that might include girls who have not yet begun, but the different sources are also, if you try to read Hindu sources, they're not in agreement with each other, because why would they be? It's everything religious produced by India that doesn't fall into the category of one of the other religions gets labeled as Hinduism. It doesn't even really have like its own name.
Correct.
That's why it's
Yeah.
called Hinduism.
Every religion, there's diversity in thought, but in Hinduism, that is especially true. Anyone who says the Hindu teaching doesn't really know what they're talking about. Anyway, Una said, why is there a universal push to marry off young girls? Not that it's okay, but no one under the sun pushes underage boys to be wed off. What's the obsession with girls? Let me answer this two ways. First, in societies that practiced very young marriages, they actually did marry boys young too, for the most part, right? When you're marrying a girl very young, you're also marrying her to someone at least somewhat similar in age, not someone aged 50. So
Well,
that is one aspect of it. Historically, there was young boys being married.
yeah,
The
there
other
were,
aspect
if they
is,
were heirs and stuff. So it,
yeah,
it depends on whether or not you
no,
only
okay,
marry men.
younger, right?
Yeah.
Younger is what I meant. Not necessarily as young as Muslims would like, but younger. Say, if you're marrying someone at 16, you're probably marrying them to someone who is of somewhat comparable age, not someone
Well,
who
it,
is
it,
a
it
grandfather.
again, it really usually not, no, not someone who's a grandfather, but in some societies they might be as old as their 30s before the men, because the men would have to reach a social status to be considered eligible for marriage, but girls are considered eligible as soon as they're old enough to be safe to have kids, essentially. But in other societies, if the boys had status because of their birth, they could be younger than the girls and they could both be in the
Yep.
cradle. Like you could have a 1-year-old boy married to a 3-year-old girl and the marriage was celebrated, and then it gets annulled later, or maybe it gets consummated, or maybe this or maybe that. Like one of the examples, our buddy Isabella Valois, whenever she was married and she died in childbirth, her husband was younger than she was and
Mhm.
was married like at 14, the minimum legal age, and then she got married like 3 years later. So it well, it's a minimum legal age to have a consummated marriage, although it doesn't seem to have actually been consummated for a while. She also kind of hated his guts, so that tends to. Actually, he may have been 11, then it actually did get consummated at 14. Sorry, I misremembered. He was only 11. She was considerably older. She hated his guts because what teenager wouldn't hate to be married? Imagine you're 16 and you're married to an 11-year-old. Like, you're going to hate him.
Yeah.
So,
And by the way, that would apply to males marrying females too. 16-year-old boys do not generally desire 11-year-old girls. Just saying.
no. Well, but the thing is, you're not expected to consummate the marriage until she's about 15 and you're 19, and then you might. But
Yeah, well, I mean,
the
but
girl will
right.
continue to hate if the girl was married to the boy when he was 11 and she was 15 or 16. Chances are extremely high that she will hate him forever. And it's just now if they met when they were 20 and 24, might be a very different story. But just
Yes.
Once you get that really terrible
And to
taste.
answer this from the
Gross.
other aspect as to why in the modern times you only ever see sicko people pushing in one particular direction, right? I've never seen a Muslim be like, "Oh, you should allow boys to be married at any age," but they do say that about girls. All you have to do is look at child abuse statistics, and I'm talking about sexual abuse here. Perpetrators, about 91% male. So you say, oh, it's 91 to 9. No, the remaining 9% is like 8% unknown, 1% female. It's extremely rare for an adult female to want to abuse a underaged child.
Don't
It is
worry, it's getting more common.
comparatively, although still quite
Yes,
rare in
it's
absolute
still really
terms, way more common for a man to want to abuse children. And by the way, this applies for both genders. Whether it's abuse of a boy or abuse of a girl, it's perpetrated by males. So that is why you see only it being argued one particular way. There is a natural inclination for men to prefer slightly younger women and vice versa, and it's taken to the extreme in the mental illness of pedophilia. I do call it mental illness, but that doesn't mean it's justified, right? Uh, you can have an inclination, you still choose whether you act out upon it. As soon as you touch a child, that's when it becomes clear abuse, clearly unacceptable, except in Islam. Because I don't think anyone chooses to be a pedophile, right? No one chooses to be genuinely attracted to children. But you do choose whether you act out on that or not, and you're fully responsible for your choices. All right, Mary, I know that you might be traveling next week. I meant to ask you before we started, do you want to just play next week by ear, or what do you
I
want to
want
do?
to do a fun one. What was the last one that you sent that you wanted to do a review of? You sent me a
Uh,
video if you can find it. I haven't
Yeah,
I
I
haven't watched
remember
it
doing
yet,
that, but I
but
don't remember the title. So
oh,
we'll be reviewing a silly Dawa video so that if
yeah.
Mary is very tired, it won't be a problem.
Yep. Yep.
All right, sounds good. We'll do that next week. And then who knows? Who knows what we do after that? Uh, I'm thinking about trying to stream one of the evenings this week. I have to see. It's unfortunate. Sometimes David Wood goes live and then no one tunes into my streams, like
Yeah.
today, right? Well, thank you
Yep.
for those who tuned in. But as someone pointed out, David was live, which meant that the vast majority of people went to him. And I don't blame him. I mean, I prefer David to myself too. But, I do want people to watch the streams. So I have to try to go around him. But he doesn't actually make plans in advance, which makes it
Nope.
very difficult to
Yep.
do. So I might try to stream one day this week. I'll just have to play that by ear. Certainly want to stream either this week or this weekend. Do some fun review of a different Dawa video than the one I'll review of Mary, probably. Bible study on Friday, as per usual. Until we meet again, have a great evening, great day, whatever time of day it is for you. And let's close with a word of prayer from Pastor Jake.
Pray this ceaselessly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me.